Hogwarts, the first capitalist of the magical world. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26 Hermione-039 S Friendship Plan. After hearing what Karl said, Hannah looked at Hermione cautiously. I just happened to see Miss Beaver wielding a knife and fork, chopping the bacon and bread in front of her into big pieces. She exuded an aura that said keep away from strangers. Hannah couldn't help but shrink her neck, looked up at Carol, and asked for help with her eyes. Karl just touched the girl's head and signaled her with his eyes to muster up courage. After being encouraged by Karl's eyes, Hannah took a deep breath and clenched her fist to make an I can do it gesture. He tiptoed behind Hermione and patted her shoulder gently. Who is it? It's very impolite to disturb others' meals. Hermione turned her head suddenly and shouted loudly. But the moment she turned around, she regretted it. She looked at Hannah, at a loss, who was about to cry. After being scolded by her, he waved his hands in panic, not knowing what to do for a moment. Carol could only stroke his forehead with his hand and said helplessly, Hermione, I think it might be better if you put down the knife and fork in your hand first, since you are dancing around like that. It's more like he didn't have enough breakfast and wanted to eat the other person. Hearing this, Hermione quickly put down the knife and fork in her hand, then looked at Hannah, who was about to cry, and tried her best to explain. I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to yell at you. I'm just in a bad mood. I'm really sorry. As she spoke, tears welled up in Hermione's eyes out of anxiety and shame. Seeing that the two girls were so confused and about to cry, Karl could no longer sit back and do nothing. He quickly stepped forward, looked at Hermione and said, Hannah and some freshmen are stuck on the castle's ever-changing staircases, and they want my help, but I don't know anything about this, and I thought you should know something. Then he looked at Hannah again and spoke in a gentle tone. Don't be afraid. Miss Granger is a very nice person. She is just a little grumpy because she didn't make any friends last night. Although she is a bit of a temper tantrum, it does not mean that she is an unreasonable person. Who are you calling a stingy person? Hermione was touched at first when she saw Karl explaining for her. The more he listened, the more he felt something was wrong, so he just started yelling. Then he glared at him and quickly walked to Hannah's side, brewing for a long time. In the end, he patted his chest and promised like a boy, don't worry Hannah, I'm not as useless as some people. I can definitely help you. Are you willing to accept my help? At this time, Hannah couldn't help laughing when watching Hermione and Karl bickering. She didn't answer the question directly. Instead, he silently took Hermione's hand. This kind and timid girl knew how to comfort people. Following Hermione's loud voice, other freshmen gradually gathered around and asked. The team began to grow gradually. A dozen little badgers surrounded Hermione, and the group of people walked out of the auditorium in a mighty manner. As soon as she reached the stairwell, Hermione couldn't wait to point at the ever-changing stairs and began to tell everything she knew. There are 142 staircases in the entire castle, and their shapes and locations can change at any time. So sometimes you walk up the stairs from the 3rd floor to the 4th floor, but the moment you step on it, the stairs could have been switched around to take you directly to the top floor. I also read a lot of books. It took me a whole night to sort out the rules here, and you have to pay special attention to it, as the book says, especially on Fridays. These stairs go crazy and change very quickly, and even many seniors get lost if they are not careful. After saying this, Hermione probably felt that what she said might be a bit too scary, so she turned around quickly. He waved his hand and said to the group of freshmen, but don't worry too much. I have summarized all the rules and recorded them in a notebook. If you need it, I can make a copy for you. As she said this, Hermione's voice gradually became smaller It seemed that she was very concerned about her own panicky behavior. She didn't know whether this would cause disgust among others, but this time, she received a lot of praise. All the little badgers, without exception, gave warm applause to Hermione's wonderful and detailed explanation. Hannah even took the other person's hands and said with stars in her eyes, "Miss Granger, you are really amazing. You are really smart. We are not as amazing as you." Such sincere praise restored Hermione's self-confidence, which had been severely damaged last night. She immediately changed her state, like a professor preparing for class, and led the team forward confidently. He said seriously as he walked, "Pay attention to this staircase. When walking on it, don't run too hard, otherwise it will take you directly to the 8th floor, and here, there are 4 such staircases in total. You must be careful." Soon, under the leadership of Hermione, a dozen freshmen arrived at the History of Magic classroom smoothly. They all expressed warm praise for Hermione's help, and Hannah was extremely happy, jumping up and down as she pulled the other person. Even after all the freshmen had left, Hermione still stood there, her face flushed, and her hands clenched. But as the saying goes, when you are happiest unpleasant things will follow. Karl, who had been following at the end of the team, walked slowly to the girl and said with a smile, "So, how does it feel to make friends? You don't have to thank me. You can now apologize to me for your previous rude behavior." Hearing this, Hermione was stunned at first, but being smart, she quickly realized that all this was driven by Karl. She said quickly with gratitude, "Thank you. I take back what I said to you before and sincerely apologize to you. You are not a shameless liar. You are a good person. I didn't expect you to go to this extent for me." Seeing that the other party was getting more and more excited, his gratitude was about to overflow from his expression. Carol interrupted the other party quickly. After all, his enchanting appearance was already a fatal attraction to women, and he was self-aware. Besides, girls of this age group easily confuse feelings and love, so I don't need too many fans. What I want is a capable assistant who has a clear mind and can make independent judgments. A wise man does not fall in love. Women will only affect the speed at which he draws his sword. So he said bluntly, "No need to thank me, Miss Hermione. I did all this for absolutely no other purpose. It was only to help you and get something in return from you. That's all. It's a fair trade." Return. Hermione was stunned when she heard this and looked at Karl in disbelief. The image of a good person in my mind, who was only willing to help others and was unwilling to leave his name, collapsed completely in an instant. Miss Beaver clenched her hands, stared at Karl, and said in a cold tone, "Then, tell me what you want in return. It cannot be anything immoral or against school rules. Besides that, I will definitely repay you well, Mr. Hohenzollern." Chapter 27 Appearance is the greatest magic. Hearing these words of repaying kindness with enmity and seeing Hermione's angry face, Karl couldn't help but feel a little playful again. He deliberately walked slowly to the girl, slowly approaching her step by step, and finally forced her to the corner of the wall at the classroom door. Like the male protagonist in a student comic, he stretched out one arm and stood against the wall behind the other person, staring at the other person's rosy face. Said in a frivolous tone, "Is anything really possible, Miss Granger? But your prerequisites are a bit too harsh. I just want to do something immoral. Don't worry, it will never affect others, but I don't know how you will feel about it." As he spoke, Carol's head gradually moved closer to the other person, and the hot breath he exhaled hit the girl's face. Hermione's whole face turned red with shame, and Karl could hear her pounding heart clearly even through her clothes. Finally, the girl closed her eyes, looking as if she was ready to be eaten, which made Karl shake his head continuously. Hermione in the corner did not get the moist and warm feeling on her lips as she had imagined, but instead got something hard. It was thrown roughly on her and finally fell into her hands, and Carol's voice sounded in her ears, "Okay, open your eyes, miss. There's no need to be like that. I'm not a pervert, and I don't have any evil thoughts. Please, help me buy all the books on the list. You can ask your parents in London to help me with this. I will transfer all the purchase expenses to your parents through some channels and pay them the corresponding compensation. After All the books have been collected. Have them hand them over to Miss Vitarozia, the manager of the second floor of the Imperial Gallery in London. It was not until then that Hermione realized that she had been deceived and quickly opened her eyes. As a result, she saw that she was holding a roll of paper in her hand point. After she opened it, she found a long list inside, listing books on various scientific fields. The entire list is more than 1 meter long. Hermione looked at the list and thought of her previous behavior. She felt embarrassed and very angry. She stared at Carol and questioned angrily, "You can find someone to buy these things yourself. Why do you want me to help you? Is my reward so cheap?" Faced with the girl's questioning, Karl chose not to answer because he couldn't tell her that he had passports from 6 countries. He also holds dual citizenship of Germany and the United States, but all his identities in the Muggle world make him a most wanted criminal by various governments. If I go to buy books openly, there will be only one result, which is that I will be caught on the spot by the security agencies of various countries. So Karl walked leisurely towards the classroom and said mischievously when he passed Hermione, "I refuse to answer this question. This is a deal. We both get what we want, and I get a free product." He pointed at the stairs they had come by, then at a staircase next to it, and spoke in a low voice. "There's an empty picture frame hanging there. If you tap it 3 times with your magic wand, it will turn into a real door. From there, you can go directly to the bushes near the Quidditch pitch." Next, Karl introduced her secret passages to Hermione, one leading to the other side of the castle. Another one can be used to avoid Fudge and his cat Mrs. Lorres during night walks. As the conversation deepened, Hermione's worldview gradually collapsed. She looked at Karl in disbelief, but the smart girl quickly understood what was going on. This guy simply doesn't understand. He knows these unpredictable stairs better than anyone else. The previous actions were a complete joke on her. Hermione wanted to leave angrily, but when she walked to the classroom door, looking at Hannah, who had already sat down in the classroom and greeted her warmly as soon as she saw her, and other Hufflepuff classmates who cast friendly glances at her, I couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, and then thought about it carefully. Hermione turned her head slowly, as if she had seen through Karl's prank. He deliberately stared at Carol, who was still feeling smug, and snorted coldly, "You don't have to do this. Use some strange actions, and don't hide your good intentions. This time the reward doesn't count. It won't be so easy after this, you nasty Mr. Carroll." After saying that, he ran towards the classroom with a red face, no longer paying attention to Carol. Karl, standing there, looked confused. That was not right. What he was doing was essentially a prank. I just wanted to tease this silly girl. Shouldn't she be angry, then call yourself a pervert and a bastard? But what Hermione said just now sounded a little wrong. Although her tone was stern, it seemed to be ambiguous. Just as he was thinking, the voice of the dog system sounded again. "You are such a perfect host. You can tease the other party like this and still get their forgiveness and make them have a good impression of you from the bottom of their hearts. You are indeed a scumbag who is good at playing with girls' hearts. Even I can't help but admire your shameless behavior. Must reward immediately. Reward points 500. Current points 3600. Right square bracket question mark question mark question mark." A face full of question marks was Carol's only expression at the moment. He stood there scratching his head. I carefully recalled all the details of what had just happened. Did I do something wrong? Why was this forgiven? Until he walked into the classroom and saw his own reflection in the classroom glass, and seeing the looks from many little witches secretly looking at him, he finally understood that this was a damn world. Even with magic. In the end, it all depends on looks. No matter how excessive a handsome person's behavior is, he will always make people think in a positive way. For an ugly person, there is no need to think about it afterwards. Just based on his behavior towards Hermione, he will definitely be greeted with a big fight. Karl, who was disappointed with the world, quietly found a corner in the classroom, sat down and looked out the window. In my heart, I was complaining madly about how hopeless this world was, and his tragic experience was all because of this broken face and the charm that the dog system added to him. It's so difficult to make yourself a pure bad guy. As time passed, more and more students came to the classroom. As everyone arrived, Karl became more disappointed with the world point because almost all the girls, like metal attracted by a magnet, sat in the remote corner where Carol was. A strange seating arrangement appeared in this classroom. Hermione, who was sitting with Hannah, sneered at this. She snorted coldly and complained to Hannah beside her in a low voice, "These people are so vulgar. They don't have any excitement about the new course or curiosity about magic. I thought wizards were different, but now they are all vulgar." Hannah, who heard the complaints from behind, was stunned at first, and then quickly retracted her gaze from Carol. He murmured in a very small voice, "But is there a possibility that Mr. Hohenzollern's face is already the greatest magic?" The sound was very small, but was still caught by Hermione. She angrily blocked the girl's view and protected this cute and shy girl behind her. Protect them from the poison of vulgar emotions and use righteous words to educate the other party. Until a ghost appeared on the podium through the wall. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28, Hermione, the labor rights activist. The little badgers and little lions were very enthusiastic and expectant about their first class at Hogwarts. Whether they were born into muggles or wizarding families, they all fantasized about waving their wands and chanting spells, master powerful magic, and gain extra points from the professor through outstanding performance. But the reality dealt them a heavy blow. The history of magic class was already boring. After discovering that the professor was actually a ghost, apart from the initial novelty, I was then hit by a series of shocks. This Professor Binns is not only a ghost, but his voice also seems to carry a magical power. He was panting as he spoke, and in less than 5 minutes, all the little wizards in the audience started to droop their eyelids. It can be said that if Cole was not sitting in this classroom, there would probably be no one in the classroom with their eyes open. Oh no, there will still be one left. Hermione sticks to her image as a top student and has been studying very hard in class. She even took out a notebook to take notes. Not only did she listen to the lecture herself, she also pulled Hannah aside. The poor little girl was about to fall asleep several times, but was forcibly awakened by the strict Professor Hermione. This made Ron and Harry, who were standing by, feel lucky that they didn't sit next to each other. Just like that, this boring history of magic class completely turned into a large sleep catch-up scene after Karl fell into a deep sleep. Various soft snoring sounds were heard in the classroom, making Hermione, the only one who was studying seriously, feel extremely embarrassed. The thought flashed through my mind several times whether I should sleep with them to avoid feeling like a loner, but they were all forced to dispel by the love for learning and respect for teachers in my heart. So a ghost, a girl, and a special course came to an end. Even after the professors had left the classroom, many little wizards were still sleeping soundly. Hermione couldn't stand it anymore. She walked angrily behind Karl and looked at the man in front of her, whom she thought was the culprit. Wake the other person up without any hesitation. Cole was forcibly awakened from his sleep and was still in a daze when Hermione angrily scolded him. "How could you do this? Sleeping during class is a great disrespect to the teacher, and you know that many people's attention is on you. Shouldn't they be taking the lead? How could they have such a negative effect?" Karl, who was criticized for no apparent reason, was also a little angry. He looked at the person in front of him, starting from the time he entered school. He said this rudely to the girl who had been entangled with him. "Is there anything you want to ask, Miss Granger? How do you know I wasn't paying attention?" Seeing that Cole was still quibbling, Hermione became a little serious. She opened her notes, found a question and asked, "Then, tell me, who is the inventor of the famous golden snitch in Quidditch?" Carol replied calmly without even raising his eyelids, "Wizard. Goldsmith Paul Wright." "I'll give you another answer. The place of invention is Godric's Hollow." Hermione was shocked to hear Karl answer the question fluently. She was very sure that this guy started from the 5th minute of the class. I was already sleeping, and the question I chose was not mentioned by the professor until around the 40th minute point, and it is said that this suggestion was made by Professor McGonagall. I want the other party to talk about some Quidditch related knowledge in the first class to attract students' attention point, and Professor Binns only mentioned it briefly, so she didn't give up and asked several more questions that were not covered in class. She wanted to tease Carol, and even she didn't know the answers to some of the questions, but what she didn't expect was that Carol still answered all the questions fluently and added at the end, "The last 2 questions are about potions, which I don't think is relevant to the history of magic course. You are very clever, Miss Granger, but people are different. How is this possible? This is impossible." Hermione, whose worldview was shattered twice in one day, found it hard to accept this reality point. Karl couldn't bear to see him shouting impossible and about to fall into self-doubt. Of course, the most important thing was that he couldn't let the future Minister of Magic suffer a serious blow to his self-confidence because of what happened today. Thus becoming decadent and mediocre is undoubtedly a huge loss to his career. At the same time, he was a little annoyed by Hermione's personality, which would undoubtedly make her more isolated among her classmates, so he prepared to take action, and the method was to let the other party find something to do. Because Karl thought that Hermione was so nosy. There is only one reason, that is, she is too idle. After all, for Hermione. The first year curriculum at Hogwarts is actually a bit too easy. She had achieved success easily, but she had no way to vent her energy. He didn't have many friends, and she was one of the few people who would talk to him. It became her target of venting, and this situation must change. So, Karl changed his expression and used his superb acting skills to speak angrily. In fact, the reason why I slept was not because I didn't respect the professor, but because I respected him too much. When I think of this professor who dedicated his entire life to the education of Hogwarts and the wizarding world, I can't help but feel that he is great. But when I think about him, after he died working hard at his post, he would become a ghost and continue to teach us. At the same time, I was angry that I didn't get paid at all. This is pure exploitation, shameless and uncomfortable. So I decided to use sleeping as a way to express my anger towards the school management for ruthlessly exploiting this great professor. As he spoke, Karl turned his head and looked at the other students who were gradually gathering around him, looking for their target. Quickly, he pointed a finger at Harry and Ron. "I think these two also have this purpose." Harry and Ron, who were accused by Karl, were a little confused for a moment, but Hermione on the side was immersed in the play. She heard about the house elves last night and was ready to discuss with others about freeing these poor creatures now. After hearing Karl's reminder, she suddenly felt that it was extremely inappropriate for the college to exploit the professor in this way. So she looked at Harry and Ron and asked hurriedly, "Really? Is this also why you sleep in class?" It was only then that Harry and Ron reacted, and Harry spoke first. "Yes, that's right. I think so too." Ron quickly added, "Yes, it's really despicable. It makes me angry just thinking about it. I can only protest by sleeping." After these two people finished speaking, more and more little wizards joined in and said that they slept in class. It is to oppose the school's shameless exploitation, and it is definitely not because I want to sleep. Under the righteous expressions of many students, Hermione gradually accepted this reality. Karl, who was standing by, sensed her emotional changes, so he continued his performance, speaking in a serious tone. "So, now, I hope you can have a good discussion with Professor McGonagall about Professor Binns' labor rights. I think among these people, the only one who can do this is you, who are so outstanding." Chapter 29 Moral Blackmail and the Lovely Hannah. Kicking someone high up is the best way to deal with someone who is difficult to deal with, but whom you cannot use force on. This kind of tactic is common in both companies and politics, such as suddenly promoting someone to a senior position in a remote area. Or you can be transferred to a branch in a remote area and serve as its head, but before that, you must promote it vigorously internally. The leader's good intentions in doing this, and the colleagues who were punished, their noble character, and their spirit of dedication. In this way, the other party is placed on the moral high ground and experiences what it means to be lonely at the top. Hermione is in this state now, under the expectant gazes of everyone, and with a firm tone of someone swearing with her own breakfast tomorrow. The girl began to firmly believe that what Karl had just said must be true. and that she had the utmost need and obligation to end this shameful exploitation point. So she looked at Carol with a complicated expression and said firmly, although you are a bastard who likes to lie, I think you are right on this point. I will go to Professor McGonagall to discuss this matter, but I also hope that you can give me some support. After Hermione finished speaking, Karl immediately made a promise. Of course, no problem, Miss Granger. If you encounter any difficulties, you can tell me. I will personally help if necessary. I promise you that this matter will have a perfect ending. The people around also quickly responded, and Harry and Ron hurriedly made assurances. That's it. Just go for it. If there are any problems, we can launch a strike. I will definitely support it. Yes, this kind of exploitation is too cruel. We must go on strike. All of a sudden, the whole classroom was filled with indignation and many people expressed their intention to strike Point. However, whether it is true, for the purpose of struggle, or simply because he does not want to attend class, it is unknown. Point with the hopes of the whole village. Hermione turned around and looked at the people who had just been educated by him. Point he bowed deeply and seriously, then turned around and strode out the door. As soon as her figure disappeared, the students present immediately dispersed. Harry and Ron wiped the sweat from their heads and said, "It's horrible. I just can't understand why she's so willing to meddle in other people's business." That's right, that preaching feeling. It makes me feel like Professor McGonagall is standing in front of me. The two of them kept complaining to each other. Hermione's unbearable personality made the students beside them nod their heads continuously. Only Hannah walked cautiously to Carol and whispered tentatively, "Mr. Karl, you are not really lying to Hermione, are you?" Judging from her expression, she should be planning to deal with this matter seriously. If she knew you had cheated on her, she would be very sad. Carol still had a good impression of this cute and kind girl. He looked at her with a smile and spoke in a teasing tone. "Don't worry, Hannah. I didn't lie to her this time. It was real, although there may be some inconsistencies in the language used. For example, rescuing Professor Binns doesn't have such a high moral sense, or I don't care about that ghost, but I do want to change the history of magic class. This is necessary. The paths are different, but the goals are the same. I will keep my promise." Hearing this, Hannah looked at Carol in surprise. She tried hard to digest what Carol had just said. In the end, she could only shake her head continuously to avoid overthinking. Her two pigtails swung back and forth, looking very cute. This action made the students nearby burst into laughter, creating a joyful atmosphere. Hannah's face flushed with shame, but she still cared about the friend she had just made, so she continued to look at Carol and asked firmly, "Really? Mom said, don't trust what pretty boys say too much. Are you sure you're not lying to me?" This soft and cute tone made Carol's already dusty compassion feel shaken for the first time. He slowly leaned over, stared at the other person tenderly with his eyes, then stretched out his right hand, revealing his little finger. "This is a special way to sign a contract. We hook our little fingers together to show that our friendship is the contract, to prove that the promise I made to you is real. How about it? Are you willing to make a pinky promise with me?" Hannah looked into Karl's blue eyes. Her face flushed with shame. After trying hard to look away, she lowered her head and stretched out her right hand. Hook Pinky and Karl together. "Let's make a promise to each other for 100 years. If I lie, you will turn me into a puppy." Karl spoke happily, and the other students followed suit. The whole classroom was filled with a happy atmosphere. Amid laughter and joy, the students left one after another, and Karl also prepared to go to the next class with the Chipperchi students. The next class was Transfiguration, and Hufflepuff was to attend it with Slytherin. Before leaving, Ron ran over, held Karl's hand and spoke seriously. "Thank you so much. I don't mean anything else. I just wanted to thank you for the first time I met George and Fred, and the other pranks, and twice." Faced with such thanks, Karl could only chuckle, but it was normal considering they were a big family. "I'm the youngest boy and I have a younger sister. So I'm not the youngest child and I can be favored. He is not the most unique one. After a long period of family indifference and the stimulation from his outstanding brother, he will always have some psychological problems." Harry, who was standing by, couldn't help but speak when he saw Ron like this. "You can't do this. They are your brothers after all," Ron replied without hesitation. "You can think of them both as your cousins, only worse." These words made Harry speechless. He could only watch as Ron continued to complain about the inhuman treatment his two brothers had given him. Until Harry noticed the murderous looks from the Hufflepuff girls next to him. Then he tried his best to pull Ron away. Ron was still unwilling to accept it and struggled desperately. "What are you doing? I didn't expect Mr. Hohenzollern to be so willing to listen to others. I haven't spoken so happily in a long time. I want to be best friends with him." Hearing what Ron said, Harry was a little angry. He stopped and pointed at Karl, who was surrounded by girls. He said angrily, "Look for yourself. If you stay any longer, you will be skinned alive by those girls. Mr. Hohenzollern is a very kind person. He is funny and kind, but you have to know that he is like a sun now, a sun full of charm. It will not be monopolized by anyone. If you stay here any longer, you will be burned to ashes by the Sunday after." Saying that, Harry looked at Ron unhappily again and asked in a stern tone, "And the most important point is, didn't you tell me last night that I'm your first and best friend?" Chapter 30 Catnip and Bonus Points. The Transfiguration classroom was on the second floor. Thanks to Ron, the Hufflepuff students almost entered the classroom on time. As soon as he stepped into the classroom, Karl saw the tabby cat on the table in front of him. At the same time, I also knew that it was Professor McGonagall's animagus state. Just thinking about walking over calmly, I heard the voice of the dog system in my mind again. Congratulations to the host for successfully sowing discord between Harry and Ron. You are indeed the worst one. Reward points 100. Current points 3700, and a special task is issued at the same time. Tease Professor McGonagall in front of you. The more special the technique, the richer the reward. The final grand prize is the complete production method of magic cards. These words made Karl feel very uncomfortable. What had he done? He didn't do anything. The friendship between Harry and Ron was none of his business. He just listened silently to what that idiot was saying. I didn't say a word, so how could I have disrupted their friendship? Also, isn't the dog system's task a bit too funny? And it seems that I'm not the only one with such a bad taste. Karl stood alone at the door of the classroom, looking at the Hufflepuff students. After seeing the cat, they all looked enthusiastic, and Hannah, the kind girl, even took out snacks from her pocket and started feeding them. He couldn't help but shake his head slightly, walked forward and pulled Hannah over, and spoke quietly with the eyes of a warrior. Overfeeding is not good for a cat's health. Look at this cat. It has a well-proportioned body. If it eats too much, it will easily become fat. As he spoke, he suddenly took out a jar of green plants in a glass bottle from his storage ring. After showing it in front of all the Hufflepuff students, he said with a smile, "This cat may not be very hungry, but it probably isn't very happy. Look at its expression. It's too serious, so it needs this." Karl's words immediately won the approval of many Hufflepuff girls, and they all stopped feeding the dogs, staring closely at the glass jar in Karl's hand. The tabby cat beside him also seemed to shift its attention to Karl. At the same time, the eyes reveal an anthropomorphic message, as if saying, "Well done, young man. You have stopped these guys from behaving unreasonably, and you can get a reward." Unfortunately, the admiring look was immediately replaced by a weird smile the moment the glass jar was opened. All I saw was this tabby cat, who was extremely intoxicated with the plants in the glass jar, with a very anthropomorphic expression of intoxication on his face. All the students present, including Slytherin students, came over and watched this strange scene. Malfoy couldn't help but ask curiously, "Mr. Hohenzollern, what on earth are you holding in your hand? I have never seen this special plant before. Is this a new type of magical plant specially cultivated by your Hufflepuff house?" Faced with Malfoy's question and the classmates who were watching from all sides, Karl's heart finally died. At the same time, in a sense, I was completely relieved. After all, if everyone had seen it, that meant no one had seen it. So he spoke softly, "It's nothing special. It's just a can of catnip, and it gives the cat's brain a burst of dopamine." In Simple terms, it makes it feel happier. Oh, is that so? That's really good stuff. Where can I buy it? After Karl finished his explanation, the little wizards immediately showed curious looks, and some even started asking about purchasing channels, so that when he was walking at night, he could use this thing to lure away Filch's annoying cat. In this way, the classmates watched for a long time, until Hannah searched for a long time, but couldn't find Professor McGonagall. Then he asked doubtfully, "It's strange. Professor McGonagall has never been late. How come I can't see her?" The call of Professor McGonagall finally woke the cat from its drunken dream, and the tabby cat suddenly screamed. He walked past everyone present and quickly headed out of the classroom. A moment later, Professor McGonagall walked in with a red face, as if she had just finished running 5 kilometers. When they saw Professor McGonagall, the students who had been gathered together immediately dispersed, and Karl also slowly prepared to return to his seat. But he was stopped sternly by Professor McGonagall. "Mr. Hohenzollern, what on earth were you doing just now? And what is that jar of plants in your hand?" This question immediately puzzled the students present, and they all cast doubtful looks at Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall now realized that she had asked a very stupid question, and she was really angry. In all these years, she had never suffered such a serious prank from her students. How could she forget that what this little bastard was holding was catnip? Karl noticed Professor McGonagall's embarrassment at the moment, so he quickly covered the catnip bottle and handed over the glass bottle respectfully. Said sincerely, "I'm sorry, Professor McGonagall. I shouldn't have done this. This plant is indeed somewhat dangerous. After all, it is addictive for cats. If you think this violates school rules, I'm willing to hand it over, but I also ask for your forgiveness." This apology was sincere and serious, and the students sitting in their seats all looked at Cole with gratitude. After all, they were watching, and Carol's action undoubtedly put all the responsibility on himself. He is indeed a good man who values friendship and loyalty. Successfully deceive your classmates' feelings. Add 10 points, add 20 points. In his mind, the voice of the dog system kept ringing, causing Karl's eyes to twitch wildly. Hearing about these classmates of his was so innocent and cute. What he is most worried about now is whether Professor McGonagall can expose the matter. If the other party gets angry and embarrassed, it will be difficult to deal with. But at this moment, Professor McGonagall couldn't help but feel a little grateful to the little bastard in front of her who made her look bad. After all, the other party's apology just now helped him cover up the problem and also attracted the students' attention. So she took a few deep breaths, suppressed the anger in her heart, and then took the catnip from Karl's hand. He said with a serious expression, "Since you admit your mistake, I will let it go. Don't bring out this kind of thing casually in the future." At the same time, in recognition of your honesty and courage to admit your mistakes, Hufflepuff will receive 10 extra points. While Professor McGonagall was speaking, another award had already arrived in Karl's mind. Too perfect, too elegant to describe. You have successfully humiliated Professor McGonagall and made her look foolish in front of everyone, but at the same time, he cleverly avoided punishment and even received a reward and immediately distributed the highest reward for the mission. Magic card production details. Go empty your classmates' wallets and humiliate your teacher. So the dog system's perverted laughter and the admiring gazes of both Slytherin and Hufflepuff students in the classroom. Cole walked slowly to his seat and was deeply moved by himself, thinking that he was a really good classmate and a good student. Chapter 31 Transfiguration Lesson. Soon, the class bell rang, and Professor McGonagall started teaching. She first used her magic wand to turn the podium in front of her into a pig, and then turned it into a bunch of flying butterflies. Finally, he put away the magic wand, and after a flash of silver light, the fluttering butterflies in the sky turned into a lecture again. Such a wonderful operation, of course, attracted constant applause and cheers from the students, but even so, Professor McGonagall still had lingering fears. She looked at Karl, who was sitting in the front row, with a hint of unwillingness in the corners of her eyes. Originally, I wanted to use Agmanus to intimidate the new freshman, and this trick has always worked. But today, I failed at the hands of this little bastard. It makes me angry just thinking about it. However, Professor McGonagall is more responsible, and she will not let her anger affect her teaching progress. After demonstrating the beauty of transfiguration, she immediately gave a stern warning. Transfiguration is the most dangerous and complex magic of all the courses you have learned at Hogwarts. If anyone dares to act naughty in my class, I will immediately ask him to leave and never be allowed to come in again. Professor McGonagall's aura was fully on display, and the whole place was silent. Even Malfoy and his 2 followers shrank their necks in fear, even though Professor Snape is extremely partial to Slytherin students in this school. As long as Professor McGonagall was angry, no one could stop them, not even Dumbledore, she said. So, when Professor McGonagall was speaking, Cole was very well behaved, sitting respectfully in his seat, and didn't do anything out of the ordinary. At the podium, Professor McGonagall waved her hand, and densely packed words immediately appeared on the blackboard. They were the Gamp's law of transfiguration, which was well known in the wizarding world. This is the basis of all transfiguration. Similar to Newton's laws of motion in physics, the little wizards were taking notes seriously, and Cole was no exception. Although he could basically reproduce all the words in his mind with just one glance. But he still took out his notebook and started recording the text. After seeing Carl's actions, Professor McGonagall couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, and she quietly came to Carl's side. Looking at the boy in front of him and the notes he made, his eyes widened involuntarily and he froze in place for a moment. It took her 5 minutes to come to her senses. Then she turned to the other students and apologized. "I'm sorry, everyone. I was a little distracted just now." Having said that, he looked at Carol again and asked excitedly, "Mr. Hohenzollern, your genius is truly amazing. If there are any problems with transfiguration, you're welcome to come see me anytime. If you weren't just a first year, I would allow you to join my transfiguration club." These words immediately made the previously quiet classroom boil, especially the Slytherin students. Most of them came from magical families and had more or less heard of Professor McGonagall's transfiguration club from their parents. That is an elite club that only students with profound attainments in transfiguration can join. Carl had only attended his first class, but he received such high praise from Professor McGonagall. Everyone was amazed at what Carl wrote in his notebook. Malfoy began to feel curious and was even ready to leave his seat to see what the other party had to say. "Return to your seat, Mr. Malfoy." For the first and only time, Malfoy's action immediately drew a rebuttal from Professor McGonagall, who turned around and gave each person a match. At the same time said seriously, "You don't have to doubt Mr. Hohenzollern's talent, and I think his creativity will soon be available to you." Professor McGonagall was telling the truth. Carl's idea was actually very simple. He got the production details of magic cards, and then the magic seal carving technique contained therein. He immediately had an idea, which was to use some transformation techniques and the magic pattern engraving techniques of magic cards, engrave the transfiguration on the cards, so that when others throw the cards on the special chessboard, the monsters in the cards will immediately transform into small 3D models. Imagine when you throw out a big cousin. After the roar of "I'm the Terminator of the world," a black dragon covered in armor appeared. Behind a ball of annihilating flames, he proudly flew over the chessboard. This is undoubtedly a huge attraction. Although the idea was good, he still had to complete the class assignment given by Professor McGonagall. The difficulty of transfiguration is ranked from easy to difficult. The dead become dead, the living become dead, the dead become living, and the living become living. The further you go, the more difficult it becomes. Don't underestimate this match. It is basically the goal of this class, and even the last month. So in the first class, Professor McGonagall's classroom assignment was quite difficult. Hannah, who was sitting next to Carl, almost broke the toothpick in front of her with her magic wand. But her toothpick remained unchanged. Another curious girl, Susan Ember's not much better than her. It took him a full 10 minutes to successfully turn the matchstick pink. Change for me. Malfoy gritted his teeth, and the wand in his hand was poking forward desperately, as if he was unclogging a toilet. Until there was a bang. A ball of sparks flew out from the tip of the wand, directly overturning his table and also affecting the 2 poor followers. Please. Focus, Mr. Malfoy. There is no point in being angry. Transfiguration requires a delicate use of magic, Professor. McGonagall frowned and criticized. And 5 points from Slytherin for your recklessness. Yes, Professor, I'm sorry. Faced with Professor McGonagall's punishment, the always troublesome Malfoy had no choice but to accept it. He turned over the table that had fallen to the ground, walked to the podium with a dusty face, and took another match. This is too difficult. Hannah complained in disappointment, picked up her matches, and showed them to Karl. I thought I had succeeded, but the match just turned silver. Looking at the match that looked like it was painted silver, Karl smiled and said to Hannah gently, "You are already great. Be more confident, concentrate yourself, and put all your attention on the match. At the same time, imagine in your mind what a silver needle should look like, without considering the consequences of failure. Be brave. Magic will always favor the brave." As he spoke, he took out his strange magic stick and lightly tapped the match in front of him. It immediately turned into a silver needle with one end thick and the other end thin, and there was a carving of a playing tabby cat on it. "That's perfect. You really are talented, Mr. Hohenzollern." Professor McGonagall, who saw this scene, immediately gave a sincere performance, even though the pattern on the silver needle made her feel uncomfortable. But even so, she will still give sincere praise and rewards to outstanding students, and she was thankful in her heart that the little bastard was not sorted into Gryffindor, otherwise she would have suffered a lot. So Professor McGonagall said affirmatively at first. 10 points to Hufflepuff for Mr. Hohenzollern's actions. After saying that, he immediately turned around and left, as if he didn't want to stay too long. Chapter 32. Professor McGonagall and -039's distress. Professor McGonagall was reluctant to speak to Cardo again, in order to avoid falling into the trap of this devil. But the students standing by were all excited. After all, this was the first student to succeed. The Hufflepuff students sitting next to Karl immediately began to leave their seats, ready to consult Karl. Karl gave Professor McGonagall a sly look. Professor McGonagall could only say helplessly, "Pay attention to classroom discipline, and keep your voice down during discussions." This sentence immediately attracted countless students to gather around Karl, and Karl patiently explained to them the secret of his success. Thanks to the existence of the Memory Palace, Karl can accurately replicate the teaching methods of all the excellent teachers he has met. At the same time, due to his god-level acting skills, what he says is humorous and witty, and at the same time, it is full of easy to understand metaphors. So under his guidance, many students successfully turned the matches in front of them into silver needles of different sizes. This surprised Professor McGonagall very much, but when she went over to check, the surprised expression immediately disappeared without a trace. Instead, there was a complex feeling of anger because of these newly created silver needles. Both feature an enchanted tabby cat. Karl sensed Professor McGonagall's change of mood and immediately began to explain. "Professor, don't be surprised. In fact, this is the projection of the deepest memory in the minds of our classmates. You should be happy, right?" After he finished speaking, he successfully turned the matchstick into the real Hannah, who immediately jumped up with joy. Holding a silver needle in his hand, he kept waving it in front of Professor McGonagall, looking at her with watery eyes, obviously asking for praise. Unfortunately, Professor McGonagall looked unhappy as she looked at the patterns on the silver needle. This made Hannah very sad, and the girl said aggrievedly, "Did I do something wrong? Professor, why are you unhappy?" This one sentence immediately made Professor McGonagall react, and she quickly suppressed her anger. Look at Hannah sincerely. "No, I was just distracted. You are an excellent girl and I'm proud of you." By the end of the get out of class, under Karl's guidance, all the students present successfully turned matches into silver needles. Professor McGonagall could only sincerely give all the students the praise they deserved, and pride was written on all the students' faces. And in order to encourage their efforts, Professor McGonagall was thoughtful enough to exempt them from the transfiguration homework for that week. But when leaving Professor McGonagall took away the silver needles that everyone had conjured up. Unlike the usual practice point allowing everyone to keep their own achievements was once confusing point. However, as the bell rang for the end of get out of class, the little wizards immediately picked up their school bags and rushed to the cafeteria point. After all, for them, having no homework is already a great thing. Point as for other things, as long as it doesn't affect my meals, they are not important. Point of course they didn't forget to thank Karl. Point Carol took the opportunity to take out many of his brochures about Hearthstone from his ring. Point he handed it to every little wizard who left and promoted his card game to them in advance. Point the little wizards also gave enough responses and expressed their opinions. I'm very happy to see new magic games added to my entertainment sequence. Point Malfoy even asked for several more and patted his chest to express his confidence. Point after I go back, I will definitely help Karl promote himself in Slytherin and sincerely invite him to visit Slytherin when he is free. Point Karl declined the invitation very gracefully, and after distributing the flyers, he took the Hufflepuff students to the cafeteria. Point Malfoy, who witnessed this scene, did not feel the slightest bit of anger at being rejected. Instead, he looked at the two followers beside him. The two were the only idiots who had not succeeded in the class, and he was so angry that he yelled at the other idiots, "Can't you two stop eating and pay attention in class? Look at Mr. Hohenzollern. He is so outstanding. He can teach those good-for-nothings in Hufflepuff so well. You two have been staying by my side the whole time. How come you haven't absorbed any goodness from me?" The two little followers who were scolded harshly had a look of grievance on their faces, and at the same time they couldn't help but complain in their hearts. Then, you should also look at yourself and see what kind of person you are. How can you compare with Mr. Hohenzollern? At the same time, Karl, who was about to reach the cafeteria, immediately heard the voice of the dog system again in his mind. Successfully alienated Malfoy and his two followers, and the points increased by 100, and the current points are 3800. I can't complain. Cole really can't complain. Point he could only be thankful that this system followed someone as easy to talk to as him. Otherwise point this dog system must have been forcibly uninstalled by the host when the first sentence was spoken. Point arriving in the cafeteria, the Hufflepuff students immediately switched to eating mode. Point even Hannah, who had been sticking to Carol, had her attention drawn to the food in front of her. But this is actually a good thing for Karl. He finally has some free time to think quietly. Point before he could think for long, a familiar and somewhat noisy voice appeared in his ears again. "You are here. I have been looking for you for a long time. Take a look. This is the labor rights struggle plan I developed for Professor Binns. See if there are any omissions." Karl turned his head slowly and saw Hermione standing behind him excitedly, holding a stack of papers. Faced with this girl who was full of energy and liked to argue, Cole really had a headache. He quickly took the paper from her hand. Point like this quantum reading. She quickly flipped through it and rejected the accusation that Hermione didn't think she was reading it seriously enough. Point at the same time, he repeated some of the contents, and after dispelling the other party's doubts, he immediately pretended to be disgusted and threw the plan aside. Point he looked at Hermione and said bluntly, "This plan, in my eyes, is a pile of garbage. You wouldn't really want to lead Gryffindors and students from other houses. It is extremely irrational to launch a strike. Not to mention that this kind of direct confrontation will cause disgust among professors, and the most important point is that if you do this, many students will fall seriously behind in the history of magic course. This goes against my original intention." Hermione was obviously not convinced by this lecture. She immediately wanted to sit next to Karl and have a good argument with him. Point, but she found that there was no seat available. However, her powerful aura soon made the Hufflepuff students unable to bear it. Point he stood up and left, giving his seat to the other person. Hermione did not hesitate at all and sat directly next to Karl. Point he argued unconvinced. "Then, what do you think we should do? Are we going to do nothing? You were the one who brought up this matter. You can't just leave it there." "Did I say I would do nothing, Miss Granger?" Facing Hermione's questioning, Karl remained unusually calm. Point he said lightly while spreading butter on the bread, "I'm just saying that direct confrontation won't work. You need to learn how to reason with the professors, so please hurry up." The books I ordered were delivered to me as quickly as possible. I read the books on legal issues thoroughly. I will answer you immediately and quickly give you the answer. Chapter 33 The Devil's Bewitchment. Hermione was still a little skeptical about Karl's words. There was nothing she could do as this guy was too hateful. I always feel that the other party does so much just to get me away. Even just to talk less to myself. Am I so annoying? Thinking of this, Hermione fell into deep self-doubt. Just then, Cedric came running over excitedly with a "We're lie twins" before the three men reached Carol. They immediately slammed on the brakes. And Cedric looked at Carol in surprise. Wow, it's only been one day and he's already surrounded by girls. The Weasley brothers were even more direct, with George being the first to joking. As expected of Arking, he now has two beautiful ladies at once. Fred also joined in, but I don't know which one is the king's queen. This joke made both Hermione and Hannah blush with shame, and Hermione could no longer stay there. He looked at Carol fiercely, waved his little fist, and spoke in a threatening tone. You'd better not lie to me. I'll write to my parents tonight and buy everything you want in 2 days at the latest, but if I can't solve the problem you raised by then, I will definitely not let you go. She yelled and ran away, and as she left, she bumped into the two Weasley brothers who were joking. The two Weasley brothers were not angry when their shoulders were bumped. They immediately stood on both sides, like knights saluting the queen. She crossed her right hands across her chest and bowed slightly to Hermione, which made Miss Beaver so shy that white smoke almost came out of her head, and she almost bumped into other people when she walked. You should know when to stop joking. You went a little too far this time. Karl started to scold them directly, but the Weasley twins shrugged indifferently. George, on the side, took out a piece of paper with names written on it and handed it over on the other side. Fred seemed to know some secret. He squatted down and whispered in Karl's ear, "I can 100% guarantee, based on my years of experience, that girl has a crush on you." Karl took the paper and looked at Fred nonchalantly. "You don't need to remind me that beautiful girls all over the world have a crush on handsome guys, especially me." Such narcissistic words made the Weasley brothers' eyes twitch, and then Karl continued to add insult to injury. "And according to an informed source who wishes to remain anonymous, you two haven't been in a relationship yet, right? So, you two are not qualified to make suggestions on this issue." In one sentence, he broke through the defense of the two men, and George spoke loudly first. "Bullshit. This is slander. How could we two brothers have no admirers given our charm? It's just the self-confidence at the beginning and the stuttering at the end have completely revealed the truth." Fred, who was standing aside, was also very angry, but when he saw Karl's enchanting face, he admitted that even he was a little moved. What's more, those are innocent girls, so he stopped dwelling on this issue and asked further, "Let's not discuss this. I have two requests. First, pay us the bill quickly. Second, can you reveal it, the name of that well-informed person? We should thank him very much." Karl just smiled at this. He carefully counted the names on the paper, and after he was clear, he looked at the two brothers. "There are 75 students' signatures here in total. According to our previous agreement, I will pay you 75 gold galleons. As for your second question," at this point, Carol paused deliberately, hooked his fingers, and asked the two to put their faces close. Make two people think that the other person intends to tell them the answer, but is just too embarrassed to say it out loud. But in the end, Karl imitated Fred's previous whispering and whispered in their ears, "I won't tell you what." Just a few simple words, but with such destructive power. The moment George and Fred heard these words, finally realizing that he had been fooled by the guy in front of him again, George roared angrily. Fred's eyes twitched. This strange scene made the Hufflepuff students who were dining nearby burst into laughter. Even many Gryffindor students joined in the laughter. After all, it is really interesting to see two troublemakers who play pranks on others every day being pranked like this amidst the laughter and cheers. Fred was the first to react, and he had to cut his losses immediately. So he looked at Carol and said firmly, "Tell me the guy's name quickly, and we can give you whatever you want." Seeing that the two guys were already furious and their emotions had reached their peak, Karl didn't plan to tease them anymore. He looked into the two people's eyes very seriously, stretched out his right hand, and rubbed his fingers. Simple. Didn't you just earn 75 gold galleons from me? Give it to me, and you will get what you want. With just one sentence, everyone sitting next to Carol, as well as Cedric opposite him, fell silent. Everyone focused their attention on the two brothers Karl and Weili, looking at Karl's eyes completely different from the previous time when the classmates who were pranked by the Weili brothers looked at each other with angry and resentful eyes. It was a complex emotion mixed with admiration and fear. What the Weili brothers expressed was more of a dissuasion. They vaguely felt the answer from Karl's mouth. This is definitely not the result these two guys wanted, but the two brothers have been blinded by their emotions. Who cares about all that? Fred immediately said loudly, "It's a good deal. We don't want any compensation for this deal. Tell us the guy's name right away." George also said on the side, "That's right. Gold galleons are no longer important now. We must find the person who slandered us." Facing the two emotional brothers, Karl did not show any emotion. He slowly took out 3 pieces of parchment from his ring. With extraordinary skill, he wrote the property transfer deed on it and then handed it to the two brothers while giving it to Cedric. "Let's be professional, gentlemen. Make 3 copies. Senior Cedric will be a witness to this transaction. Let the 3 of us sign our names at the same time, and I will tell you the answer." This action deepened the speculation of everyone present. Several Gryffindor students could not help but come over to persuade the Weili brothers. Hannah, who was next to Carol, was also shaking her head desperately, her 2 little lamb-tail braids swinging back and forth, which was the biggest warning she had given. But the 2 Weili brothers on the side, like lambs bewitched by the devil, still walked into the trap step by step. The 2 of them quickly signed their names on the contract and forced Cedric to sign his name as well. After Karl signed, the contract was completed. However, Karl asked the 3 to put away their respective contracts, and finally, under the gaze of everyone, he said lightly that this answer was worth 75 gold galleons. Professor Minerva McGonagall. Chapter 34. Karl, a lecture on courage. What? A scream almost blew off the roof of the auditorium, and at the same time, a stern scolding came from behind everyone. "What are you all doing here? Don't you all need lunch? Especially you two, Fred and George. What tricks are you playing again?" As soon as Karl gave the answer, Professor McGonagall came towards them aggressively. There was no way. She just stepped into the door of the auditorium. I saw George screaming wildly, and a large group of students gathered together, and I immediately subconsciously thought, I don't know what tricks these 2 naughty ghosts are playing. Seeing Professor McGonagall's menacing look, all the students were immediately frightened and stood still. At this moment, Karl stood up slowly and walked towards Professor McGonagall with an attitude of "no one else can do it better than him," which moved all the classmates. The 2 of them greeted each other briefly and started communicating immediately. From a distance, the students couldn't hear clearly what Karl and Professor McGonagall were saying, but they could tell that the 2 seemed to be very happy communicating. Professor McGonagall kept nodding with an expression of approval on her face. This scene became the last straw that broke the Weili brothers' inner defenses. After seeing this scene, the 2 brothers were 100% sure that Cole was not lying, and that it was really Professor McGonagall who told him. All of a sudden, it was impossible for the 2 men to seek revenge, and the 75 gold galleons were completely wasted. Fred and George collapsed into each other's arms, and the onlookers expressed sympathy for them. At this moment, Cedric walked over with a very complicated expression, holding the parchment contract. He squatted down, looked at the 2 brothers lying on the ground, pointed at the words on the contract and said, "I told you not to be so impulsive. Take a good look at what is written on the contract. Look here. There is an additional clause. It says that if you can prove that the answer Karl just gave is a true truth, in return, he will take 50% of the wages you will receive for your future work as a reward." The devil. This is simply the devil. No, that's not right. Even if Satan comes, he will tattoo Karl on his back. This contract not only made all the efforts of the 2 brothers for the entire morning go to waste. In the future, heavy shackles were put on the 2 men, and the two brothers supported each other and tried to stand up from the ground point, but his legs were still too weak, so he finally turned to other Gryffindor students, because they were in the same house. Helped the two brothers up from the ground point. Just as the two of them sat down in their seats, Karl ended his conversation with Professor McGonagall. He walked over with a smile on his face, and the crowd immediately split into two lines, their eyes filled with admiration and fear. As soon as he arrived in the crowd, Cat immediately looked at the Weasley brothers and the Gryffindor students behind them. Said with a smile, "Professor McGonagall asked you to return to your own college's dining table immediately. As for the two of you, do you want to verify it? Professor McGonagall hasn't left yet, so you can go and ask her about the truth of the answer I just gave. To kill someone, one must also destroy his heart." At this moment, the Weasley brothers no longer have the courage to go to Professor McGonagall to verify the matter. Just feeling the cold gaze coming from Professor McGonagall in the professor's chair made their legs tremble. The other Gryffindor students were also eager to leave as soon as possible. So George took the lead in expressing his opinion. "No, thank you, Mr. Hohenzollern, for your honesty." Fred also said weakly, "Yes, thank you for the answer. It's really worth the money." After these two parties expressed their opinions, there was no reason for others to stay, and they quickly dispersed. Cat also slowly sat back in his seat, but he didn't expect that. As soon as he sat down, Hannah, who was standing by, looked at him a little unhappy. "How could Professor McGonagall help you lie? Why did you do this? This is very bad behavior." Faced with the criticism from this innocent girl, Karl felt that his heart was seriously hurt. He immediately pretended to be wronged, took out the signed contract from the ring, and handed it to the girl. Pointing to the last clause above, he said sadly, "How could you think of me like this? It's really sad. Look at this last one. If they can verify that I'm lying, not only can they get back what they worked for, they can get double the compensation, which is just a simple lie. It's like a bubble that appears hard on the outside, but bursts easily with a poke. But they don't have the courage to verify what I say." Having said that, Carol immediately changed into a serious expression, looking at Hannah's still somewhat confused eyes, and said, "Courage is a precious quality of human beings. It is not something you can play many pranks on your classmates, or violate school rules crazily. You already have courage. Real courage is the confidence you have when you face your deepest fears and dare to move forward. They don't have the courage. They have violated the tenets of Gryffindor. This is just a punishment for them." After saying that, Carol picked up a piece of honey cake from his plate, handed it to Hannah, and said while touching the girl's soft and comfortable head, "As for your first question, I didn't ask Professor McGonagall to lie for me, and I couldn't ask her to lie for me. That professor is an upright lady. I will always respect her. I just asked her a few questions about transfiguration magic, and came up with some. Welcomed my own genuine insights. The simplest exchanges. Absolutely no lying involved." Finally, Karl looked at Cedric and said helplessly, while shaking his head, "The whole performance was just to ease the guilt I felt for the huge loss I suffered from those two guys. It's a pity that, even though the treasure is right before our eyes, the Gryffindor warriors don't have the courage to open the treasure chest in front of them. It's so deceptive. Too deceptive." Cedric looked at the Hufflepuffs and was deeply moved by Karl's words. Even Hannah, who first raised the question, nodded repeatedly while tasting the honey cake. With just a few words, Karl suddenly changed from a mischievous perpetrator to a victim who was deliberately plotting, but not understood. Cedric has become a muggle all over, and he is increasingly feeling that the sorting hat must have been broken because it has been left for too long. Or maybe that shabby hat had reached some kind of deal with this guy. Otherwise such a person would never have been sorted into Hufflepuff. Slytherin's soul should be in the sorting hat at this moment, roaring and howling non-stop. But now that things have come to this, he has no choice but to take out his copy of the paper and hand it over. And when Cole was clearing the list, he asked impatiently, "By the way, how long will it take for your magic card plan to become a reality?" Faced with such a serious question, Cole was very happy. This was a motivated subordinate. Unlike those two, who thought about girls as soon as they met. This behavior was very unpromising in Karl's eyes. I gave them a project to make money, but they didn't want to build a career and only wanted to have sex with women. So he must punish them. And as for Cedric, Karl spoke carefully and seriously. The other problems are easy to solve. Wait until the stingy guy brings me some books on art. The art problem of the cards can be easily solved, but there are still some shortcomings in the magic technology. I need the support of a potion master. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Professor Snape and-039 S anger. This. Cedric hesitated to speak. He knew very well who the potions master Karl was talking about. If it were yesterday, he would definitely persuade Karl not to offend Professor Snape. But at this moment, he saw with his own eyes Karl's methods, as well as the Black Raven, that was about to become the leader in the Owl Dormitory. After putting together thousands of words, he could only stand up, pat Karl on the shoulder, and nod. I wish you success, but I hope you will be nice to Professor Snape. Even though he dresses poorly and doesn't wash his hair, he is very mean to his classmates and often deducts points from us Hufflepuffs for no reason. But I know he is a good professor. As he spoke, Cedric's old habit of being long-winded came back, and he kept on talking non-stop, saying good things about Professor Snape. But because of Professor Snape's daily actions and his honest nature, during the process of speaking, people always mention Professor Snape's various shortcomings, such as his always gloomy face, as if others owed him money. Some say that he is too strict in teaching and has no consideration for students at all. Some say that he is too protective and always criticizes students from other colleges. He tried every possible way to deduct points from other colleges. Maybe it was because he hadn't vented his anger to anyone in a long time, and this guy was getting more and more outrageous. The louder he spoke, the more emotional he became. Even his classmates next to him were desperately winking at him, signaling him to stop talking. This guy also acted as if he didn't see anything until a voice as cold as iron came faintly from behind him. It seems that you have a lot of opinions about me, Mr. Diggory, or are you Hufflepuff students like him, Professor? Snape appeared behind Cedric like a ghost. His face was cold, and although he usually looked like this, one could still feel that he was angry. Of course, the Hufflepuff students did not dare to encounter this bad luck, and they were even more afraid of the potions class later being bullied by Professor Snape. They opened their mouths to explain, but were scared back by his cold gaze. Helplessly, under Cedric's leadership, everyone's attention was once again focused on Karl. Why Karl could only sigh helplessly, put down the sandwich he had just taken a bite of, and looked at Professor Snape with some anger. Just say it, Professor. Are you guys free at noon today? Why do you like coming to our college so much? I want to have a good meal. Nothing. There was complete silence. This time, the entire auditorium was silent. The students from the 4 colleges all turned their eyes to Karl. Even the professors sitting above. They also had an expression, as if they had seen a ghost. It had been a long time since they saw a student like that in front of Professor Snape. When speaking like this, most of the students' eyes were filled with fanatical admiration. After all, many of them had heard about the back-to-school gift that Professor Snape gave to Karl. Many students had originally planned to skip classes to watch Karl's first potions class. Now, I don't have to skip classes and can watch the live broadcast directly. What do you mean by that? Don't you understand the word respect, Mr. Hohenzollern, Professor? Snape had a cold face and looked directly into Karl's eyes. Before that, you hadn't officially enrolled yet, and we weren't in a teacher-student relationship. I could tolerate your insolence, but today, you must pay the price for your actions. Hufflepuff House will deduct. Seeing that Professor Snape was about to deduct points from his own college, Karl, who was just and had a strong sense of honor, how could he allow this to happen? He simply waved his hand to interrupt the other person and showed that weird smile. He said in a low voice, no need to be like this. I know you've always been thinking about that lady in your heart. Shut up, Raw sounded. Professor Snape's face looked very scary, and he stared at Cole with his eyes. He asked, squeezing out words from between his teeth. How do you know all this? What on earth do you want to do in Hogwarts? Faced with the questioning, Karl, who had been interrupted 3 times during his meal, became angry and spoke directly without any scruples. Don't worry about it. You will not be able to refuse the conditions I proposed. As for how I know it, there is always someone who knows any secret. I always have a way to find out these secrets. These words immediately made Professor Snape turn his head and look at Dumbledore, who was sitting in the center of the uppermost part of the hall. He stared at the other person with a deadly look, as if he wanted to eat him. Dumbledore was frightened by this look, and the candy in his hand fell directly onto the plate. The eyes hidden behind the half-moon glasses are full of confusion and grievance. The old man looked at Carol dimly, with an indescribable feeling in his heart. Today he had been concerned about Carol. Observe how this special student, Karl, gets along with his classmates on his first day at school and comes to the cafeteria for meals. How come this time I got blamed for no reason? This little bastard is just like that guy. They can always control me easily. People from the Grindelwald family are all poisonous. Professor Snape was very angry. After not getting the look he wanted from Dumbledore, he did not bother with Karl anymore and just turned around and left. His aura of keeping strangers away and impending anger made all the little wizards get out of the way. After his back disappeared, Cedric confirmed it again and again, then sat down and patted his chest to let out a breath. He had finally passed this level, but after thinking for a while, he looked at Carol again and couldn't help asking, if you do this, how are we going to proceed with this matter? Do you want to apologize to the other party? Have a meal? Karl was also very angry. He was just eating a meal and had so many things to do. How could he be a good Hufflepuff? And doesn't this guy know that the core purpose of Hufflepuff House is to eat? Carol's roar put an end to the cafeteria turmoil, and all the students dared not say another word. Everyone lowered their heads to eat their meals, a lunch that usually took an hour or 2 to finish. After this incident, it was declared over in just 15 minutes. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall left in a hurry, as if they had something urgent to discuss. Students from other colleges left even earlier. After all, eating in silence is not as fun as discussing today's gossip in the common room. Finally, Karl and the first year Hufflepuff students were the only ones left in the hall. Everyone looked at Carol with some fear, and no one dared to speak to him in advance, for fear of offending him. As Hannah was the only classmate sitting next to Karl, and she was a girl, she had no choice but to ask, so, what should we do next? Faced with this question, Karl's eyelids twitched wildly. It was all Professor Snape's fault, as he had ruined his image of being gentle, considerate and kind. It collapsed completely in an instant, and what was even more infuriating was that the dog system in my mind kept messing around. Congratulations to the host for successfully alienating the trust between the professor and the headmaster, and taking a solid step towards ruling Hogwarts for yourself. Reward points 500. Add to that the previous deduction of the fruits of my classmates' labor and the debt they incurred, a total of 75 gold galleons. Additional reward of 750 points. Current points are 5250. Chapter 36 Limitations of Smart People. Looking at the integral number, 5250, Karl felt something was not right. He wanted to greet the family of the system with beautiful words, but thinking that it had no family left, he could only bear it, and turned around to take the Hufflepuff students with him. Getting ready to go to the afternoon classroom. In order to restore his image along the way, Karl did his best to chat and laugh with his classmates, being both humorous and gentle and considerate. But the most important thing is to put the blame for his own anger on Professor Snape. There is charms class in the afternoon, and 2 classes are connected together. After arriving at the classroom, Professor Flitwick stood on a tall pile of books and called the roll. Because this class was for Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff together, so the roll call time is a bit long, and the seats in the classroom are also very interesting. The distinction is really clear. It seems that the Ravenclaw students don't think much of the Hufflepuff badger. In fact, it is normal to think that these self-proclaimed smart intellectuals always have this bad habit of being overambitious, but lacking the ability to achieve their goals. Karl understood this, but that didn't mean he wasn't angry. However, out of respect for Professor Flitwick, he did not lose his temper on the spot. Instead, he acted like a good student, attending class quietly and waiting for the opportunity. Spells are the basis of everything, and learning spells is not just for mastering magic. Its position in the magical world is more like that of mathematics in science and engineering. It is a tool subject and the foundation of everything. Only when you have mastered a certain number of spells can you apply what you have learned to other situations and begin to have your own understanding of magic. Professor Flitwick's teaching method is very interesting. Although he is not tall, he speaks in a humorous way and is full of positive passion. The way he speaks is very contagious. Today, we are going to learn the most basic spell, the illumination spell. It is very simple. The spell is luminous. Pay attention to the pronunciation, which must be standard. Also, pay attention to my gestures. Watch my gestures carefully. Perhaps it was because Professor Flitwick took into consideration that Hufflepuff students generally came from Muggle families during their teaching. The details were repeated so many times that some Ravenclaw students seemed a little bored. However, since Professor Flitwick is the head of Ravenclaw, these people did not dare to be too presumptuous. They just gathered together and whispered to each other. Such unfriendly behavior naturally aroused the indignation of the little badgers, and Professor Flitwick on the stage couldn't help feeling a little embarrassed. Acts of contempt between the four major colleges happened from time to time, and he had always tried his best to avoid such occurrences, but things always develop in the bad direction. In distress, he scratched his already sparse hair, but he didn't say anything to stop it, which made Karl very unhappy. He was already very angry during lunch. Why am I being looked down upon for coming to class? So Professor Flitwick let everyone practice freely. The classroom suddenly became noisy, with the sound of chanting spells rising and falling. The students of Ravenclaw were the first to complete the spell. It must be said that these people are really smart. For them, casting this simple magic is a piece of cake. On the other hand, the Hufflepuff students had different postures, but no one succeeded. The best performing student was Hannah. She successfully made the tip of her wand emit a little white fluorescence. This scene, unsurprisingly, attracted the ridicule of the Ravenclaw students. A young wizard from a magical family. He even stood up, pointed at Hannah and smiled. Look at her. Look at the light on the top of his wand. The buds of the fireflies in my yard are brighter than hers. After he finished speaking, the other students immediately started laughing, whereas before they had just laughed silently. He was now laughing without restraint, and Professor Flitwick immediately came over to stop him. You can't talk like that, Mr. Robert. What you said is very rude. Because of this, Ravenclaw will deduct 10 points. The Hufflepuff students all nodded in appreciation of Professor Flitwick's fairness, some even gloating. But for Karl, this was far from enough. He stood up, left his seat, and walked slowly to Mr. Robert. Because of his age, he was 2 heads taller than the other person, and he looked down at the other person. His eyes were filled with a coldness that was compounded by a friendly temperament that he had accumulated over many years of struggling, developing a gang in New York. Robert was frightened by Carol's eyes. His body kept shrinking back, and he asked with a trembling voice, "What do you want to do? This is a classroom. Beating up classmates in Hogwarts is a very serious offense, classmate." Carol smiled disdainfully. "When you just said that and insulted that lady, why didn't you think of it? She is your classmate." With just one sentence, the atmosphere in the classroom immediately became tense, and Professor Flitwick quickly ran over with his short legs, pulling Carol's sleeve. He said seriously, "Mr. Hohenzollern, I will take care of this matter. I will never allow us to use violence in my class, and please also understand that violence will never be respected. I understand your anger. Can you understand my anger?" Karl didn't beat the guy, but turned to look at Professor Flitwick. You can bow slightly to show respect to the other person, but you can speak in a rather unfriendly way. "I will always respect you, Professor. Your integrity and fairness are enough to earn the respect of everyone in our college. But my anger is not only because my classmates have been insulted for no reason, but also because of the wisdom of Ravenclaw. It seems to have disappeared into the dust of history, leaving behind only an empty shell, a lifeless shell. As he spoke, Karl slowly walked to the open space in front of the podium under the gaze of Professor Flitwick and his classmates. He took out his wand and raised it above his head. It's a fluorescent spell. No one has innovated it in thousands of years. How sad it is. Magic has stopped developing. It makes people look hopeless. Although it is extremely gorgeous, it is a dead body. It's just that the process of decay is so long. Having said that, he turned his gaze towards Mr. Robert again and said with a sneer, "Your name is Robert. What a coincidence. You have been mocking the Muggle-born students in our house since the beginning of the class. History is such a coincidence. In this country, nearly 2 centuries ago, there was also a man named Robert. He mocked a great man. Don't doubt it. They are all Muggles, but he was the one being mocked. I am not like the smart people here who would shrink back when faced with difficulties. Instead, I face them head on. He has created his own great cause. Coincidentally, he also has his own views on light. Let me imitate him and open your eyes. At the same time, I must tell you the name of that great man. Isaac Newton." Chapter 37. God said there must be light. As he spoke, Karl waved his hands gently, and the curtains in the classroom were suddenly lowered without any warning. This action not only surprised the Ravenclaw students, but also made Professor Flitwick's eyes light up. Such exquisite use of magic, and without the assistance of a wand. How come this child was sorted into Hufflepuff? He should belong to Ravenclaw. Karl did not feel proud of this at all. This was an ability that he was forced to awaken, and he did not know it was magic at first. At the beginning, he thought he would become a mutant like Magneto. When all the curtains were drawn, the classroom immediately became extremely dark. Karl raised his left hand at this time and clenched his fist slightly towards the air in front of him. He already knew this set of skills of his. Rather than being a superpower, it is more like using magic to apply special pressure to an object at a specific point. As we all know, according to Lord Newton's law, when an object is subjected to pressure, its volume will collapse. The density will also increase, and different air densities will cause different refractions of light. Karl used the mind palace in his brain to begin to conceive an air body similar to the prism in optical experiments. After he had completed his idea, he took out his magic wand and pointed it at the crowd in the darkness, whose expressions could not be seen clearly. Bowing slightly, an actor who was about to perform on stage said lightly, "God said, let there be light, but human wisdom can give this world a different color." Luminous, a silver white light emanated from the tip of the strange magic wand and was refracted by the air prism in front of it. Brilliant colorful lights began to flash like disco balls, appearing throughout the classroom. Looking at the colorful light, everyone fell silent. The Ravenclaw students looked at the boy in front of them in surprise. One of the Asian girls had a different emotion in her eyes, and she stared at Karl. In his mind he recalled the distant legends from the east that he had heard before. Before that world came into being. The entire universe was in chaos, and an extremely tall giant, holding a sharp axe, split the chaos apart. Light emerged at that moment, and colors also emerged at this moment. It illuminated the world and gave the world beauty. In her eyes, Cole was like a giant at this moment. He decomposed a white light into countless colors. It shines into this dim classroom, using the most gorgeous beauty to respond to the ugliest evil in human nature. That's beautiful, Mr. Hohenzollern. You're a genius. Such a simple spell. You can actually produce such an effect. 30 points for Hufflepuff. 4. Your innovative wisdom and noble character, Professor Flitwick was extremely excited at this time, and he kept jumping around Karl. Like a kid seeing candy. Facing this simple professor, Karl's dissatisfaction could not help but dissipate a little, and he also began to feel playful. He continued to use his special ability to change the density of the air in front of him, while continuing to conceive various wonderful prism refractions in his mind. So under his operation, Those colorful beams of light turned into gorgeous light butterflies and began to fly around the classroom. A moment later he turned into a giant in armor, waving the sword in his hand to kill the evil dragon guarding the treasure. At the end, Cole waved his wand violently, and the Ravenclaw Blue Eagle emblem immediately appeared on the wall at the back of the classroom. At the same time, a line of bronze sentences also appeared under the badge. Wisdom is always the most precious wealth of mankind. Before the Ravenclaw students could be proud for long, the light and shadow changed again, and the Hufflepuff house emblem appeared on the wall. Below the badge, there was also a line of words, but after seeing that line of words, the students of Ravenclaw. I felt mixed emotions because of what was written on that line, but true wisdom will only appear in the hands of kind and upright people. After doing all this, Cal put away his wand and waved his left hand. The moment he stretched out his hand, the curtains opened. The white sunlight shines into the classroom, driving away the darkness and the bright and dazzling colors. All the movements were done in one go, and Karl on the stage bowed to his audience like an actor who had finished a performance. All the students felt like they were dreaming. With those brilliant colors and those miraculous operations, it is much more interesting and shocking than them waving their wands, chanting spells, and emitting a white ball of light. The Hufflepuff students stood up and applauded, expressing their greatest respect to Karl. Although the Ravenclaw students looked strange, they all stood up and applauded. After all, in the hearts of this group of people, knowledge is always worth pursuing, and it doesn't matter who holds it. Ravenclaw always recognizes people who are smarter than themselves. Professor Flitwick was even more moved. He wiped the tears from his eyes and clapped his hands vigorously. And when Carol was about to go back to his seat, he pulled the other person and said sincerely, "You are so outstanding, kid. Whether it's your creativity or your character, your heart is full of love and kindness. You are absolutely right to do this. Just like you use your magical power to bring glory to this classroom, you have done something of your own and dispelled the darkness that has accumulated between the colleges for a long time." Amid the applause of his classmates and Professor Flitwick's earnest praise, Cole returned to his seat with a well-deserved feeling. Just when he was about to enjoy the treatment as a good person and a hero, the voice of the dog system in his mind sounded again. Congratulations to the host for successfully taking revenge on Ravenclaw College. Those guys who looked down on others were so clever. That's right. Let's trample on them and ravage them in the field where they are most proud. Points increased by 1000. Current points are 6250. Looking at the 250 at the end, Karl always felt that this bastard system must be able to hear his voice. This is wanton revenge and shameless behavior. But he didn't have time to worry about these things, because after his actions, the classroom finally returned to a harmonious teaching environment. He was busy helping Professor Flitwick, tutoring students who were slow to make progress. And because of Karl's actions, the Hufflepuff students had completely regarded him as a hero. After the incident in the cafeteria, where he lost his temper, completely forgotten. Now in the eyes of these girls and boys, Karl is a gentle and considerate person. At the same time, they are full of the perfect image of justice, and they are vying to ask Karl to teach them. However, the results were not very ideal. Fortunately, Professor Flitwick and Cole were very patient. Before the bell rang for the end of get out of class, most of the students had completed the spell. Even Hannah, who performed the best at the beginning and then made the slowest progress, completed the spell at the last minute point. A bright white ball of light appeared on her wand. "I made it. I made it. Thank you, Karl. You are my best friend in the world." The girl waved her wand desperately and then hugged Karl tightly, making him a little at a loss. However, he was still very gentlemanly and did not take advantage of the other person. He just touched the other person's head to show encouragement. But I have to say, Lala's body is really soft. Detected perverted thoughts. Added 50. IRUB. Chapter 38. Argument in the PRINCIPALN-039 S office. After spending a relaxing Beautiful and pleasant first day of the new semester. Most of the students started chatting and gossiping in the common room after dinner, while the professors returned to their offices correct homework or prepare the next teaching plan. As for the principal, he might be hiding in his office, eating those weird candies. Dumbledore just picked up a piece of lemon sherbet and was ready to taste the sweet taste. But there was only a clang, and the desk in front of him shook. The door of the principal's office was roughly pushed open from the outside, and Professor Snape came out like a black bat. He walked over aggressively, and as soon as he stopped, he didn't even say hello to the other party, but directly questioned angrily, "Why did you betray me?" Dumbledore, with a face full of question marks, turned his head stiffly and looked at Professor Snape while scratching his head and said, "Severus, would you believe me if I said this had nothing to do with me, Professor?" Snape was obviously very dissatisfied with this answer. His black eyes stared straight at the old man in front of him. As if to say, "I don't believe you." The atmosphere in the principal's office suddenly became awkward. It was not until Professor McGonagall arrived at the door of the headmaster's office and was about to knock that she found that the door had been opened. There was also a dark footprint on the brown wooden board. She hurried in and saw Dumbledore and Professor Snape staring at each other nervously. "What's going on?" Professor McGonagall asked directly, her tone stern. Hearing this, Professor Snape could only withdraw his gaze and remain silent. He still had great respect for Professor McGonagall. After all, it was she who put the sorting hat on her head back then, but it was about Lily. He doesn't want to have too much communication with anyone. So he turned around and prepared to leave, but was stopped by Professor McGonagall. "Don't leave yet. It's a good thing that you are here. I also have a question for Albus. It's about Mr. Hohenzollern." As she spoke, Professor McGonagall pulled out a glass jar from her pocket and threw it on the headmaster's desk angrily. Finally, he glared at Dumbledore and scolded him, "Look at the good things he has done. Today is the most painful day in my many years of teaching career. I didn't expect this child to be so mischievous that he could only use something like this to play a prank on the professor. Although he is extremely talented and has many creative ideas, he is a genius in transfiguration. But let's put it one thing at a time. Mistakes and achievements cannot be mixed up. How are you going to deal with this issue?" "That's right." Professor McGonagall came to the headmaster's office late at night to cause trouble for Dumbledore. The reason was very simple. As an old cat lady, she was really angry about what Karl did in the morning. And she knew very well that this little bastard must have some connection with the old man in front of her. Faced with Professor McGonagall's questioning, Dumbledore dared not be vague anymore and picked up the glass jar. After carefully examining it, I opened it and smelled it and discovered that the green plants inside had a strange smell. There didn't seem to be any problem. He scratched his head in confusion and looked at Professor McGonagall. "It seems to be just some plants that smell strange. It's not a prank prop compared to those things from the dung egg. This is already a good thing. How on earth did he use this thing to play a prank? Could it be that he put these things into the professor's oatmeal?" Seeing Dumbledore trying to make fun of her, Professor McGonagall was really angry, but she couldn't do that in front of the two of them. Remind them that this is catnip, and besides, she came here today just to vent her anger. No matter what age they are, girls are unreasonable when they get angry. So Professor McGonagall questioned Dumbledore directly in an attitude she had never done before. "You must tell me about the child's background and that you are his guardian sponsored by the Ministry of Magic. You have to fulfill your responsibilities as a parent instead of hiding here every day like this. If you don't do this, for the safety of students, I have no choice but to submit a report to the Ministry of Magic and request a review of whether Mr. Hohenzollern can attend Hogwarts." The truth was revealed, and Professor McGonagall also asked about Karl's background, which made Dumbledore very embarrassed. He looked at Snape for help, but Snape didn't show any intention of helping him. Instead, he exaggerated it. "Yes, I think so, but I don't think it's necessary to report it to the ministry. Mr. Carroll has a long-standing talent for mischief and deception. Hogwarts, I'm afraid another mysterious person will appear, so I suggest you expel him directly." These Words gave Dumbledore a headache. He really couldn't figure it out in just one day. How did this kid offend two professors? What a jerk. Exactly like that guy. The atmosphere in the headmaster's office fell into a stalemate again until Professor Flitwick walked in excitedly with his short legs. As soon as he stepped through the door, he looked at Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape standing there, although a little confused. But he didn't care much about it. After simply nodding to the two of them, he couldn't wait to look at Dumbledore and said excitedly, "You know what, Albus, that particular student, Mr. Hohenzollern, is just amazing. Not only does he possess an unparalleled talent for magic, but he is also full of a sense of justice and is considerate and gentle to his classmates." After hearing these words, Professor Snape and Professor McGonagall turned to look at Professor Flitwick. That puzzled look clearly said, "Is the person you are talking about and the person we see the same person?" Professor Flitwick didn't care about that. He was so happy today that he had to tell everyone what happened in his class. He wanted to explain it to everyone, so he began to describe in detail and seriously everything Karl had done in the spells class, including the other party's outstanding colorful magic and the well-reasoned resistance when facing insults. After he finished his story, Professor McGonagall couldn't help but fall silent. She was indeed very angry today. And she had also used some channels before. I have heard some things about this mysterious Mr. Karl, so I took this opportunity to try to pry some secrets out of Dumbledore. The reason for doing this is mainly for safety reasons, but after listening to Professor Flitwick's story, she couldn't help but feel a little shaken. Dumbledore saw Professor McGonagall's inner turmoil and quickly struck while the iron was hot. Indeed. After listening to your story, we can confirm that some of the previous rumors about Mr. Karl are basically inaccurate. He is a good kid and his naughty behavior is just because of his miserable childhood. Well, regarding Snape and McGonagall's proposal, now that the three professors are here, we can vote on it. Please raise your hands if you disagree with the dismissal or investigation. Mr. Hohenzollern. After saying that, he immediately raised his hand, followed by Professor Flitwick. After hesitating for a long time, Professor McGonagall also raised her hand helplessly. Only Professor Snape was left standing there. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, he snorted coldly and turned away. At the same time he also said, "You will definitely regret your decision today. Hogwarts will definitely become a mess because of this kid's existence. I have a feeling nothing good will happen in my class tomorrow." As he said this, Karl, who was far away in the dormitory, couldn't help but sneeze. Although he felt a little strange, he quickly adjusted himself and continued writing and drawing on the desk in front of him. And on a piece of paper next to him, there was a line of big words written. Professor Snape's Training Plan Chapter 39. Dress up as a woman, Harry. The second day of the new semester, in the auditorium. After the first day of school, the freshmen from the 4 major colleges all got up early. In the auditorium, everyone was enthusiastically discussing what happened yesterday and commenting on the courses given by various professors. Generally speaking, the little wizard's favorite course is undoubtedly the charms class. Professor Flitwick was easy to talk to and never discouraged anyone. And they had plenty of time during class. Wave your wand freely and cast magic. The transfiguration class was good, but Professor McGonagall was too strict. In just one day, she frightened many young wizards. Another thing is that transfiguration is too difficult. Among the students of Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, only Miss Beaver succeeded in the whole day. On the contrary, students from Hufflepuff and Slytherin houses mostly completed their class assignments successfully. After turning the matches into silver needles, those troublemakers in Slytherin even ran directly to Gryffindor house to show off. If the results of their classes had not been taken away by Professor McGonagall, they would not have been able to prove it again for a while. The two groups almost came to a head with a fight in the Gryffindor common room. Finally, when Professor McGonagall returned from the headmaster's office and heard about the incident, she deducted 10 points from each of the 2 colleges. But where there is good, there must be bad. Harry and Ron came to the long table of Hufflepuff College early in the morning. To Karl, he complained wildly about Professor Snape's atrocities. It was clearly Harry's first class, and the black bat deliberately targeted him and asked a bunch of unreasonable questions. Miss Granger at the side had her hands almost raised to the ceiling. He wouldn't allow her to answer. "It's just terrible," Ron said angrily while he was using his knife and fork to cut the chicken leg in front of him. It was as if the chicken leg was Professor Snape. Harry was also a little depressed, and he looked at Cole gloomily. "Mr. Hohenzollern, I remember you had a conversation with Professor Snape in the cafeteria yesterday at noon, and he gave you a gift at the beginning of the school year. Can you tell me why he targeted me like this? Could it be that I'm born unlovable? If it were an ordinary British man, he would look at a handsome boy with red lips and white teeth, leisurely telling him his grievances. I'm afraid he would have taken the other person into his arms by now, but unfortunately, Karl was a German, and Germany was most famous for steel point, so he could only smile awkwardly and choose not to answer the question. Actually, he couldn't answer it. He couldn't tell the other party that Professor Snape was targeting him because of his special feelings for Harry's mother. If you want to blame someone, blame your mother for giving birth to you as a boy. If you were a girl, the situation would probably be very different. If Voldemort dares to touch you, he will be greeted by countless invisible warriors and Professor Snape, who has extremely high combat power. But Karl's silence made Harry think that the other party knew something, but was unwilling to tell him. This made the other party even more distressed, and for a moment he was extremely frustrated. He lowered his head and used the cutlery to move the breakfast on the plate. This scene made Hermione and Hannah, who were standing by, feel a little bit sorry. The two girls looked at Karl and pleaded at the same time. "Mr. Karl, if you know anything, just tell us. Shouldn't classmates help each other? Mr. Potter is so pitiful." "That's right. He clearly knows the situation, but he has to pretend to be profound. He likes to be mysterious and play some pranks." A gentle persuasion and a justified criticism. Karl looked at the two girls in disbelief and thought, they are both products manufactured in England. Why is there such a big difference between them? But having said that, if he said nothing, he would seem petty. So he cleared his throat, looked at Harry in a profound manner, stared at the other's face, and said with a smile, "Mr. Potter, you asked me this question yourself. What I'm going to say next is just my personal speculation. As for whether you are willing or not, and the impact caused by this move, it is none of my business. My suggestion is very simple. Just put on some makeup and pretend to be a girl, and the whole thing will be solved." What? After Karl finished speaking, everyone present looked at him in disbelief, with weirdness and disgust in their eyes. Even the Hufflepuff students who regarded Karl as a hero yesterday were shocked after hearing Karl's suggestion. I couldn't help but move my body, fearing that the other party would get mad and do something inappropriate to me. Seeing that he was about to become a pervert, Karl became a little angry. He glared at everyone and said unhappily, "What are you thinking? My sexual orientation has always been normal. I have no interest in your bodies for the time being. My hobbies have always been simple. I like mature women, so please don't think too much about it." After these words were spoken, everyone present couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, but at the same time, a hint of regret inadvertently flashed in their eyes. These subtle emotions were all captured by Karl, making him feel terrified. He could understand that Hermione and Hannah were too little Lolita, and felt a little regretful. After all, his charm was their point. If the girls present didn't have any feelings for me, it would be my failure. But Ron is a man, so there is nothing for you to regret. No, this is too dangerous. I must persuade Harry to dress up as a woman and share some of this disgusting firepower with me. So he looked at Harry again, and he saw the struggle in the other's eyes, so he continued to persuade him. "Please think carefully, Mr. Potter. Potions is a major subject that will accompany you throughout your 7 years of study. If you want, you will continue to be bullied by Professor Snape at school. Just pretend I didn't say anything just now. If you want to try to make a change, I can help you. It just requires a simple magic. I accidentally invented this magic when I was learning spells yesterday. I can help you." The Devil's whispers reappeared, and Karl's image was very much like the angel in Christian mythology, with blue eyes and blonde hair full of sunshine and warmth. So, when he uses performance to confuse others, it often has unexpected results. In addition, Harry really longed for friendship, so this morning he agreed to the other party's request to become his friend. With a dual blessing of friendship and appearance, Harry, the little lamb, eventually fell into the devil's trap. Yao nodded and said firmly, "Thank you very much, Mr. Hohenzollern. It's not a problem at all." Seeing the other party agree, Karl immediately laughed. "And you can just call me Karl. Don't call me by my last name, that would be too unfamiliar." As he spoke, he actively asked the dog system for the first time in his mind, "Do you have cross-dressing magic? You must have this kind of perverted prank magic." "What nonsense are you talking about, host? How can you save your energy by wearing women's clothes? I have magic that can directly change the gender of the other party." Since this is the first time the host has actively requested this kind of beautiful magic, a special discount is given. 500 points for women's magic. 50 points for sex change magic. You can choose whatever you want. Chapter 40, Haribo, and Chapter 1, Potions. Only children make choices. As an adult, of course I want them all, so Karl directly exchanged both magics. Successfully consumed 550 points. Remaining points are 5750. The reward has been issued. Please recall it in your mind. After hearing the system's voice, Karl immediately found the 2 magic spells in the memory palace in his mind. In fact, if I think about it carefully, this consumption is a sure win, and there is no need to explain the first magic. I can use it right away, and it doesn't matter if I use the second one. Who knows, maybe one day Harry will figure it out and use this magic. What's more, he could send this magic to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, to help some gentlemen who wanted to change. I'm really a good person and I always think about others. Karl, whose sense of morality was greatly satisfied, came back to his senses from his own mind and looked at Harry dimly. "Mr. Potter, you will not regret your decision." As he spoke, he took out his wand, tapped it lightly on the other person, and whispered, "Charming." A white fluorescent light quickly enveloped Harry's entire body, and after a moment, the light dissipated. "Wow, how can this be?" Harry turned into a girl and looked so good. Exclamations came one after another, but Harry, as the person involved, felt no change until Hermione next to him noticed. With a face full of mixed emotions, Harry finally understood. After handing the other party the small mirror he always carried with him. Why would others exclaim when they see themselves in the mirror? Their short hair becomes long and straight, and there is light eyeshadow between their eyebrows and eyes. Her skin also became delicate, and her face, as white as jade, had a faint blush, a face that combined cuteness and charm. The most shocking thing is that Mr. Karl seems to have overexerted himself. His chest, waistline, and hips seem a little too mature. Even her robe, which was one size larger than the average girl's, seemed a little too tight. He was a little surprised and rubbed his upper body, causing the boys next to him to swallow their saliva. "How could you do this?" Hermione screamed at the sight and quickly pulled Harry aside, blushing and scolding him for his behavior. Harry was also confused and emphasized hurriedly, "Hermione, please don't do this. This is fake. This is fake." But Hermione didn't care about that and took Harry away after he had transformed. Ron, who was standing by, followed quickly, fearing that his good brother would be abducted by a strange woman. After the 3 of them left, a group of Hufflepuff girls quickly gathered around them, staring at Cole without saying a word. His eyes were full of desire, but Carol could only shrug helplessly and looked at Hannah, who was in the lead. "Don't get excited, ladies. That's fake. I must emphasize that it's fake. You are all still very young. You are mainly cute right now. You don't need that mature feeling yet. You will have great potential in the future." I believe that. This bucket of cold water made the girls feel a little depressed. Hannah was even a little dissatisfied and said silently with a pout, "I just said that I like mature people. The fact that I want Harry and I to become like that must have something to do with you, Mr. Carroll. You are a liar." Seeing that his XP was about to be exposed in public, Karl had to be very thick-skinned, not wanting to continue this topic. He quickly coaxed and tricked the freshmen into gathering together and prepared to head to the potions classroom. Along the way, he tried his best to explain to Hannah and the other girls that they were already cute and beautiful and did not need the assistance of magic at all. It took him more than 10 minutes to finally change everyone's minds and barely maintain his image as a gentleman. Just when Karl breathed a sigh of relief and thought he had finally passed this level, that annoying voice rang out again. Congratulations to the host for using magic to satisfy his perverted desires. This is the first time the host has publicly admitted it. I have this perverted idea, so my points are doubled. 1000 bonus points, and my current points are 6750. Get lost. Karl cursed the system desperately in his heart. In reality, he led the Hufflepuff freshmen and quickly rushed to the potions classroom. In just one day, Professor Snape's reputation became known to everyone from Slytherin to Hufflepuff. The freshmen, who always liked to enter the classroom on time, did not dare to act rashly at this moment. There were still 30 minutes left before class started. But the classroom was already full of Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students. No one dared to make a loud noise, except for some students who were observing the unique decoration and style of the potions classroom. Most of the students' eyes would glance towards the door from time to time, also filled with fear of the unknown. Karl and Hannah sat at the same table as usual. To be honest, he was not too worried that Professor Snape would target him. Although there had been some misunderstandings between the two before, overall, he had already made a judgment about this professor. That is, he is a good man, no matter how rough and unruly he appears, and never washes his hair. But in the final analysis, he is a good person with his own bottom line, so he can never be his opponent. Karl is still very confident about this. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, Professor Snape walked into the classroom door with precise steps. He strode in, so fast that he even created a breeze. His black robe fluttered in the wind, and he really looked like a walking bat. As soon as he walked to the podium, Professor Snape's unique, low and magnetic voice rang out, "Put away your useless wands." In fact, this voice is still very masculine, but combined with the other person's dress, it only gives people a cold feeling. All the little wizards present did as they were told, fearing that if they were a little slow, the bats in front of them would suck their blood dry. Like other professors, the first thing Snape did in class was to take out the roster and start calling the roll. Unlike other professors, when he called the roll, it always felt like the god of hell calling the roll. Every little wizard who was called responded quickly and carefully, fearing that they would be reprimanded for being a little slow. But there are always exceptions. When Snape called the last name on the roster, Carol responded like an old acquaintance and did not forget to joke with the other party. "Here, Professor. It seems that you still haven't accepted the advice I gave you before. You really should think carefully about your appearance, especially the hair. If it's too much trouble, I can find a way to help you." With just one sentence, the originally silent classroom suddenly became noisy, and the students immediately started whispering to each other. Professor Snape looked at Cole with admiration in his eyes, his face darkening frighteningly, but he did not say a word. After the brief contact before, he had come to the conclusion that this little bastard was poisonous. I couldn't talk to him. He was like a devil, always gaining the upper hand in the conversation without me noticing. So he ignored the other person and instead calmed down the other noisy students with a look and spoke slowly. "Accurate sense of time is the necessary foundation for brewing potions. I'm glad that no one is late, even if some people haven't learned it yet. What is respect?" Chapter 41. Professor Snape, the Vengeful One. Respect. Of course I know what respect is. Karl immediately retorted. Respect itself is based on an equal relationship. I will always respect you, Professor. Your knowledge of potions and your character are worthy of my respect, but that's why I have to persuade you to change. I can't let you go down the wrong path and go all the way to the end, even if you don't understand. Karl spoke so sincerely that Professor Snape's eyes twitched, and he almost had high blood pressure. The other students secretly gave Karl a thumbs up and admired his courage. At the same time, he also blames Professor Snape Isn't that a bit ungrateful? I felt the atmosphere in the classroom and was inexplicably confused by this little bastard. Professor Snape did not bother with the other party anymore. He knew that he was an introvert and not good at speaking. If this guy argues, he will be the only one who suffers in the end. So he skipped Karl, walked over to the other students, and began his opening remarks. You are here to learn the precision and rigorous craft of potion making. There is no silly waving of wands here, so many of you may not believe that this is magic. As he spoke, he suddenly turned 360 degrees on the spot and scanned the entire audience with a sinister look. I don't expect you to truly appreciate the beauty of a simmering pot with white smoke and fragrant aromas. You will never truly understand the wonderful power of the liquid flowing into people's veins to make them feel confused and bewildered. But I will teach you how to increase your reputation, brew honor, and even prevent death. The entire opening speech was very infectious, and many people were already fascinated and looked expectant. Karl even took the lead in applauding to express his recognition of this excellent speech. He believed that this level of speaking ability was second only to the legendary Grindelwald in the wizarding world. But it's normal. After all, Professor Snape used English and the other party used German. German is recognized worldwide as the most suitable language for public speaking. As for where he stands in the magical world, he can only apologize because he believes that his stage should not be this small magical world. It's a speech to the entire planet, to billions of people. After the opening, Professor Snape turned around again and suddenly looked at Karl and spoke. Mr. Hohenzollern. Karl was stunned for a moment, but soon stood up and looked at Professor Snape dimly. Didn't you ignore me? You still hold a grudge. You are such a mean guy. You will cry later. If we want to make her. Besides, what else do we need besides lionfish spine powder and flobberworm slime? Hoklop juice. Professor, how many methods are there to make the rejuvenating agent? There are 3 methods: extraction, boiling, and grinding into powder. So if I needed a bizzle, where would you look for it? In the cow's stomach. But now there are many artificially cultivated products. What are the steps for treating porcupine quills in scabies potion? Cut it into 3 cm lengths and make a slit diagonally every 1 cm. After asking 4 questions in a row, Professor Snape finally stopped and looked at the other party dimly. It seems that compared with Mr. Potter, you are more worthy of the title. The other students were just dumbfounded. They understood every word of the conversation between the 2 people. But when they are put together, not a single word makes sense. Why are you looking at me? Is what you just said written on my face? Write it down quickly, Professor. Snape suddenly exploded, and the students immediately began to take notes in a panic. Karl seemed to want to say something, but as soon as he opened his mouth, Professor Snape's face turned back. His eyes were fixed on him, and his lips moved slightly. Sit down. Oh my, why don't you give me face? Carol was a little angry, but his body was very honest. Okay, you. After being playful for a moment, she immediately sat back in her seat. He knew that this guy was just holding a grudge and deliberately trying to mess with him, so he made some preparations in advance. Although it was called preparation, it was actually very simple. It was just a quick flip through of most of the potion books that could be found. With the help of the memory palace, he memorized it by rote, so in theory, Karl is now invincible. But as soon as he sat down, Karl suddenly thought of something, stood up again, and looked at Professor Snape dimly. Professor, I answered all your questions. Did you forget something? Shouldn't this give us extra points? I don't really care about the grades, but I happen to hear some bad rumors about you among my classmates. For example, extreme favoritism towards Slytherin, or something else. If this matter cannot be handled impartially, I'm afraid it will damage the professor's reputation. Seeing that Cole was about to continue talking nonsensically, Snape's face became extremely ugly. He said angrily, shaking his hands, Hufflepuff gets 10 points, but because of your behavior just now, you were disrespectful to the professor and disrupted class discipline, so Hufflepuff will be deducted 20 points. Damn. Cole was completely dumbfounded. How could this operation be impossible? Confusion was written all over his face. Professor Snape was very satisfied when he saw this expression. He returned to the podium with light steps and waved his right hand gently. The process of making the potion for treating scabies appeared on the blackboard. Then he spoke in the only softening tone he had had since the beginning of the class. The materials are in the closet. Work in pairs. If I find anyone wasting materials, I'll make him eat the extra materials. These words, even though the tone was improved, made all the young wizards shudder. Cole was still standing in his position, and Professor Snape was looking at him proudly. Mr. Hohenzollern, would you like me to ask you to sit down? These words made Karl's anger reach its peak. He stared at Professor Snape with a resentful look without any hesitation. Very good, man. You have successfully caught my attention, and you will definitely regret it later. But Professor Snape didn't care about any of that. He was just like his nickname. He transformed into a giant bat, wandering around the classroom, and suddenly appeared behind a classmate like a ghost. Then, watching the other party's frantic operation, he gave the professor a loving criticism in his cold tone. Miss Bones, is there something wrong with your eyes? You can't even see a word as big as a venomous snake tusk. What are you doing with the boar tusk? And you, Mr. Carter, why are you smiling so happily? What do you mean by being ground into powder? Or has the powder in your brain been the same size as the peas in your house since you were a child, Professor? Snape was spraying venom indiscriminately and continuously deducting points from the two major colleges, making all the students in the classroom tremble with fear. Hannah, who was in the same group with Karl, was timid to begin with and was so frightened by this scene that she started trembling all over. He used so much force in his hands that he almost broke the material into pieces. This scene was seen by Professor Snape. The other party immediately appeared behind the two of them like a ghost. The action is not standard. Hufflepuff will be deducted 5 points. This time, Cole really couldn't stand it anymore. He turned around and stared at Professor Snape. Can you please go away? Your face is scary now. It will be annoying. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42, The Troubled Potions Class. Shut up, Mr. Hohenzollern. I must deduct 10 points from Hufflepuff for your disrespect for the professor. Professor Snape was not angry when he heard Karl's cheesing, but continued to spray venom as usual. The only difference was that when he was leaving, she looked at him quietly and said this. Also, let me correct you. I'm not annoying, I'm just not very likable. WTF. Hearing this, Carol felt like his brain was about to burn out, so he had no choice but to stop dwelling on the matter, start focusing on brewing potions. As for the points deducted from Hufflepuff, those are all minor problems. I have plenty of ways to make the other party pay back 100 times as the class progressed. Karl even began to empathize with Professor Snape. Because according to my own observation, the hands-on ability of these students is so low that it is a bit scary. Either they got the steps wrong, or they mixed up the ingredients. One table even put porcupine quills into the potion ahead of time. As a result, the crucible used to brew the potion exploded, and the boiling potion splashed everywhere. The little wizards were grimacing in pain due to the burns, and some of them even had several big blisters on their bodies. Faced with this situation, Professor Snape was quite responsible and rushed over immediately, but his approach was not so gentle. He briefly checked the injuries of several people, then took out a few glass bottles from his sleeves. After opening the seal, he forced the liquid in without any explanation. Looking at those poor students, they were grimacing in pain due to the burns. Now he was tortured by Professor Snape's potion and was grimacing. Karl kept shaking his head. Fortunately, there was no big problem on his side. Although he had never seen Professor Snape prepare potions, I can't use the memory palace to achieve a perfect 1:1 reproduction. But fortunately I have strong hands-on skills. I remember that when I was 10 years old, I had already learned how to manually disassemble and assemble firearms and configure this low-level human magic potion. It is as easy as cooking instant noodles. Put the ingredients into the pot in order. Boil the water over high heat first, then simmer over low heat. Finally, turn to high heat to collect the juice. When the crucible turns into a pot of ugly green slime, you are basically done. Just when Cole was full of confidence, he had just come back from watching the excitement and saw the silly girl Hannah standing next to him. I was busy adding ingredients to the pot, and the color of the liquid in the pot was obviously wrong. He looked at Hannah in surprise and asked quickly, "What did you just put in there?" I just looked away for a minute and the color of the pot turned blue. Porcupine quills. The little girl's eyes revealed a kind of innocence that could be tainted by knowledge. What? Carl's brain was about to explode. He hurriedly tore off his robe and covered the dry pot with it. Then he instantly put out the burning stove, hugged Hannah and yelled, "Everyone, get down." Boom. With a loud bang, the nearly finished potion exploded, just like the mistake the two little wizards made before. Fortunately, Carl responded in time. His robe blocked most of the power of the explosion, and his shout also allowed many students to dodge in time. After the smoke cleared, everyone stood up and expressed their gratitude to Karl. After all, considering the power of the explosion just now. If the other party hadn't done this, all of them would have had to go to the infirmary today. As for the person who caused the explosion, of course, Hannah was also forgiven by everyone. After all, she was a lolly, so she could always get extra forgiveness. However, there are exceptions to everything. Professor Snape, who was the tallest and standing in the center of the classroom, did not have time to lie down. The explosion blew Karl's robe directly onto the professor's face, and the pot of blue potion and the crucible also fell on his head. A sea blue viscous liquid flowed down his big hooked nose, and his dark eyes were filled with furious murderous intent. Everyone was stunned, but after watching carefully, they found that all the little wizards made uniform movements. He turned away and covered his mouth with his hands to stop himself from laughing. I don't know if it was because the medicine was too hot or because Hannah changed the steps. This pot of medicine for treating scabies, it seems to have a strong hair loss effect, with greasy long black hair falling out in clumps a moment later, under the already dim light of the classroom. A big bald head suddenly appeared in the middle of the classroom. "Mr. Hohenzollern, what on earth are you doing? Have your brains been eaten by the ghouls? And, miss, your creativity is truly amazing. I have to give you the highest praise for your feat. Hufflepuff will be deducted 50 points, and Mr. Hohenzollern, you must stay and clean the classroom after class. Wipe all utensils until they are shiny enough before leaving." Professor Snape's roar kept echoing in the classroom, scaring all the little wizards, who just now had a look of gloating on their faces. It immediately turned extremely pale, and no one dared to say a word, for fear that the fire in the city gate would affect everyone. Hannah was so scared that she was about to cry. Her pigtails swung back and forth, and she looked at Carol with red eyes and asked anxiously, "What should we do? What should we do? We have been deducted so many points by the academy, and we have no more materials. Is it a waste to make a new potion? I don't want to drink that disgusting pot of stuff." Hannah was about to turn black and white, and she was so naive that she really thought Professor Snape would ask for help from someone who wasted materials eating the wasted ingredients into one's stomach. I have to say that pot of blue slime is really disgusting. And the points deducted were really too many, so Karl had to take action. He slowly stood up, left his seat, and walked directly to the cupboard, then took out the ring according to the market value. He took out a gold galleon and 2 silver sickles and placed them on the podium under the surprised gaze of everyone. Holding a new potion ingredient, he returned to his seat. Even Professor Snape, who had been staring at Karl, was confused for a moment by this operation. He walked slowly to Carol's side, staring at him intently. "Mr. Hohenzollern, what do you mean?" Carol did not show any sign of fear and looked up and responded, "Nothing. I know that the materials used in the potions class are very expensive, so you, Professor, have tried so hard to persuade us not to waste them, but because of our mistakes, our unnecessary waste, and the losses caused to the school, of course I have to compensate. This is what I should do, Professor. You don't have to thank me." After just 2 or 3 sentences, Professor Snape was unable to find any fault and could only walk away with his sleeves Folded point that's it. Professor Snape said one last word. Your learning ability poses no threat to me in the academic field, but it can bring me infamy in the field of education. After the concluding remarks, this troubled potions class came to an end. Chapter 43 Bribing Professor Snape. Finally, as the bell rang for the end of get out of class, students from the two colleges rushed out of the potions classroom as if they were escaping from the plague. He was afraid that if he ran a little slower, he would be caught by the furious Professor Snape for the whole class and have to deal with those disgusting potion materials after a while. Karl and Hannah were the only ones left in the classroom, still sitting in their seats. Carol kept persuading the little girl to wait at the door and he would be out soon. The little girl was quite loyal though. She was obviously scared to death and was shaking all over, but the little head was shaking like a helicopter and he insisted on staying and being punished with Karl. We are partners. That incident was originally my fault. Don't worry. I may not be good at other things, but I'm still very good at wiping things. If we two work together, we won't be late this afternoon. Hannah said this seriously and even wanted to take the towel in advance to show Carol her professional ability. Karl felt a headache. Helpless, he could only pick the other person up. He carried her to the door in a standard princess carry, and after putting her down, he looked at Hannah, whose head was already steaming and her face was flushed. Said with a smile, "Don't worry, give me 10 minutes and I will come out. We are Hufflepuffs. No one can stop us from having lunch in the cafeteria." As he spoke, he slowly closed the classroom door. Now, only Karl and Professor Snape were left in the classroom. Professor Snape was still at the podium, packing up his things and seemingly writing something. That big, shiny bald head was dazzling under the light. Carol did not go to get the rag at this time, but slowly walked to the other party and watched him write on the parchment with interest. "Mr. Hohenzollern, I'm afraid you really don't understand what respect is. Have you forgotten the punishment I gave you? More importantly, you are a little too presumptuous, Professor." Snape's tone was so cold that it was a little scary, and his stern eyes, coupled with his shiny bald head, made him look very scary. Just the gaze was enough to scare the little wizards, but Karl chose not to fall for it. He took out a piece of paper with exquisite patterns printed on it from his ring and handed it over. After the other party took it. Looking at each other with a smile. Professor Snape glanced at the paper, then his expression became even uglier and he asked directly, "What do you want to do?" "If I'm not mistaken, this is a promissory note from the recently launched Wizard Cornucopia Financial Management Fund. It says no name is required, 10 gold galleons payable on site to the bearer. Give me this. What do you want to do?" "Of course it's to bribe you, Professor," Karl said with a smile. It was as if what I just said was just a simple good morning. This one sentence immediately made Professor Snape really angry, even though he didn't have a single hair on his head. He stood up suddenly, slowly moved his face forward, and scolded Carol almost face to face. "Do you know what you are talking about? Your behavior is no longer a simple violation of school rules. It is already a serious moral issue. If your actions just now are reported to the headmaster and the board of directors, it will be enough to expel you from Hogwarts. I know you have a remarkable background, and I know some of the things you have done in France and Germany, but at Hogwarts, I will never allow you to threaten anyone." Facing Professor Snape's almost showdown action, Karl had no intention of retreating. Just smiled simply. "Don't worry, I won't threaten any classmates or hurt anyone in the school. This money is more of a reward than a bribe. Professor, I need you to do something for me. It's about potions. These are my advance payments to you. Take it away. I don't need it. Take the rag and clean the classroom immediately." Professor Snape's eyes were still cold. "Otherwise, go to the principal's office immediately and apply for withdrawal." This was already an ultimatum, but Karl remained unmoved. He still stood there blankly with his lips slightly parted. "Indeed, you should not be short of money. As one of the most famous potion masters in the wizarding world, you can make any potion you want. In Diagon Alley, they can all be sold for a high price, but your life has always been very difficult. I miss the magic you are thinking about. It should be very expensive." "About that lady." Boom. The sharp feather pen pierced the thick parchment, and almost in an instant, Professor Snape suddenly retreated to the door of the classroom. The speed was so fast that Karl only saw a shadow point. After creating some distance, Professor Snape immediately took out his wand and pointed it straight at Karl. Who are you? How did you know these things? What is your purpose? If you can't give me a reasonable explanation, I would rather stay in Azkaban for the rest of my life than to destroy you. Looking at Professor Snape, who suddenly attacked, Karl did not panic, but raised his hands to show that he had no intention of resisting. At the same time, he used his special ability to teleport 3 thick books to Professor Snape. How about you take a look at my plan first, and then make a decision? You don't have to make a decision right away. I can wait for you for a while, but souls are always subtle. The sooner you implement your plan, the sooner you can see each other. No matter what, I respect your choice. Hearing this, Professor Snape was silent for a moment, and at the same time he saw that Cole really had no intention of resisting. Then he put away his wand, picked up the 3 thick books from the ground, and began to read them carefully. As he read deeper and deeper, Professor Snape's sinister look was gradually replaced by desire and hope. After finishing reading the last page, he slowly raised his head and looked at Carol. How on earth do you know these things, and how do you imagine these thoughts? I have to admit that you are countless times worse than that so-called mysterious man. He is at most a psychopath who likes to kill people, but you like to play with people's hearts and even their souls. This sentence is too evil. I can't, Professor. Snape wanted to refuse, but Karl raised his hand to interrupt him. He walked slowly towards the classroom door until he came to the other person's side. Looking at the other person's big bald head, he couldn't help but laugh. Then he took out a smooth black wig and handed it to the other person while saying with a smile, I don't mean to laugh at you, but I think this thing can solve half of your current troubles. As for the other half of your trouble, I'll give you a few days to think about it. Just give me your answer this Sunday. As for whether this plan is feasible and the moral issues involved, I'm sorry that your previous criticism was problematic. It's not that I have a moral problem, it's just that I don't have that kind of thing at all. As he spoke, Karl pulled the door handle of the classroom and looked at Professor Snape with his eyes squinted. Now that I've said all that, can I go now? If it's any later, I'm afraid the cafeteria will run out of good food. Professor Snape had a strange look on his face. He stared at the other person for a long time, and finally squeezed out a word from between his teeth after a long time. Roll. Chapter 44. Canteen Incident and Harry 039's Distress. In the cafeteria, when Carol walked in with Hannah, whose face was flushed, the whole audience immediately erupted in enthusiastic cheers from all 3 houses, except Slytherin. No matter whether they were seniors or juniors, they all gathered around immediately and started cheering for Karl. The Weasley brothers even lifted Karl onto their shoulders, as if they were welcoming a hero. He took Karl for a spin in the cafeteria, letting him fully enjoy his cheers. Even the dog system, that had always been a spoiler, said something particularly nice this time. Congratulations to the host for showing a strong personality charm and successfully fooling the professor. You are indeed the chosen one. Reward points: 1000. Current points: 7750, causing a sensation in the whole school, triggering a series of rewards, and the talent of mastering potions. It turns out that you can speak human language. Karl complained about the system in his mind, and then opened his arms in reality. Enjoying the cheers of the crowd, he was just about to stand on a high place and yell at everyone. The students in the school have suffered from Snape for a long time. I'm starting this rebellion today, not for fame or fortune, but for the common people of the world. Unfortunately, before Karl could give his victory speech, Professor McGonagall came over aggressively. With just 2 glances, everyone present immediately scattered like birds and beasts. Karl put it on the ground again, looked at Professor McGonagall, and said with a smile, "What's up, Professor? Are you here for lunch too, Professor?" McGonagall looked at the other party and said angrily, "Mr. Hohenzollern, you really went too far. You've only been here for 2 days, and you've already caused chaos throughout the school. You Tease the professor again this time. I must severely criticize you and your next class. It just so happens that the principal, other professors and I all have time. We will go to sit in on the class to determine what to do with your education next. Faced with such criticism, Karl said he could not accept it, and he immediately refuted it. That's not right, Professor. I have already apologized to Professor Snape and reconciled with him. If you don't believe me, you can ask other students. He punished me in class and asked me to clean the classroom after class. It was my sincere apology that moved the other party, allowed him to avoid punishment, and reconciled with him. This should be a model of teacher-student friendship. Besides, at this point, Karl deliberately lowered his voice and spoke quietly. Don't you hate Professor Snape's greasy hair? Everything has two sides. This time he lost his hair, but I have also regained an opportunity to change myself. Is this a good thing for the school? Wrong logic. Professor McGonagall glared at the other person fiercely, but didn't say anything else. In fact, she also hated him very much. Snape's greasy hair is indeed a bit disgusting every time I see it. Moreover, after questioning other students, it was proved that what Karl said was not entirely false. So she said immediately, okay, I will believe what you said for now, but this cannot be changed for the next audit class. You must promise me that you will not play any pranks on the professor next time. Can you do that, Mr. Hohenzollern? Hearing this, Karl immediately patted his chest and expressed his confidence. Of course I'm fine, I promise. Really? Professor McGonagall asked doubtfully. Of course it's true. Karl's expression immediately became a little aggrieved. Are you doubting me? I am a little naughty, but I don't want to be as annoying as Professor Snape. Please believe me. Looking at the aggrieved expression on Kaz's face, Professor McGonagall had to admit that at that moment, she even felt soft-hearted and wanted to apologize. But after less than 70 hours of understanding, he already understood the little bastard in front of him. Like the old bastard that Dumbledore had been with before. He was a born showman and liar. I absolutely cannot be fooled by him, but although I can tell that he is just performing. The students standing by, however, were not so clear about the distinction and all had strange looks on their faces. In order to prevent myself from becoming disliked by classmates like Professor Snape. After Professor McGonagall repeatedly emphasized that pranks were not allowed, she left angrily. After she left, the students who had just fled in all directions immediately gathered around again and started to flatter Karl. Even Cedric, the man with thick eyebrows and big eyes, was not as sincere as him and gave him a thumbs up. Until Harry squeezed out of the crowd, looked at Cole with a red face, and wanted to say something. Looking at the many classmates who gathered around me, I felt too embarrassed to say anything. Karl saw his embarrassment and quickly persuaded the students who were watching the fun to go back and have lunch. After a lot of busy work, the crowd finally dispersed. When Harry saw the crowd disperse, he spoke hurriedly. Mr. Karl, can you help me remove this magic? It's really too troubling. I caused quite a bit of trouble today when I went to the toilet and during class, and there were a lot of strange looks, even from Ron. Harry couldn't say any more because this matter was so embarrassing that he really didn't know how to start. It's not his fault. Harry has a good foundation, and Karl has amazing magic. And with such excessive body changes, it would be strange if boys weren't moved by her, not to mention someone like Ron who has never seen the world. Even some senior students in the upper grades would inevitably have different ideas. Lali. Just thinking about it makes people excited. Karl said he could relate to Harry's experience. After all, he also suffered from the troubles caused by his appearance. He could often be sure that when Cedric spoke to him, there was something wrong in the depths of his eyes, so it was even more impossible for him to let Harry remove the magic. He had to put a target in front of him to avoid that kind of disgusting look from appearing on him again. So he thought hard, and after a moment, he came up with a solution. He looked at Harry, nodded and said, "Of course, no problem. You are my friend. It was my mistake that caused you trouble. I apologize." The sincere apology made Harry a little at a loss. He quickly waved his hands to indicate that it was not the case, and it was none of his business. But just when he was about to explain, Karl suddenly changed the subject. But I just heard from Professor McGonagall that only Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors, the first years, have classes this afternoon. It's the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. The headmaster and other professors are all here to sit in. Professor Snape is of course here too. As you know, there was a little misunderstanding between Professor Snape and I during the last class, so he might be in a bad mood now. What can I do? What? Upon hearing this, Harry's little face immediately fell, and with his exquisite makeup, he looked so sad and beautiful. The eyes of all the boys were immediately attracted to Harry, and the girl thought for a long time with a worried look on her face. When I thought about the first time we met, Professor Snape, who had no grudge against me, targeted me like that. Now that he has suffered and is very angry, how will he treat himself? I thought about it. Harry could only sigh helplessly. Forget it. I'll just keep doing this until the end of the next class. Chapter 45 A Wonderful Afternoon. Harry had just agreed to keep the makeup on until the end of the next class, and Karl immediately started laughing. The boys nearby, including Cedric and the Weasley brothers, couldn't help but express their approval of this wise decision. They kept nodding and secretly glancing at Harry from time to time. This made the already shy Harry even more shy, and he also began to realize that Karl might not be doing this entirely to help him. It seemed like there was some other purpose, so he turned around in shame and prepared to leave. Before leaving, he turned around and stomped his feet, then looked up at Carroll with a resentful look and said, "Don't lie to me, Mr. Carroll. I have always respected you, and thank you for your help." After saying that, he turned and left. As soon as he left, the two brothers Cedric and Weasley immediately surrounded him. George immediately pretended that Harry had just done this and spoke in a strangled voice. "I have always respected you, Mr. Carroll. Thank you for your help." This action gave Karl goosebumps, and he glared at the other person fiercely with his eyes slanted. Said without mercy, "Shut up, you. No one is allowed to joke with me in front of me, except pretty girls. If you want to learn this, I wouldn't mind casting a spell for you as well. With your tall stature, you will surely confuse many of your former brothers." This one sentence made George shut up immediately. He now knew better than anyone else the boy in front of him with an angelic and gentle appearance. But if you are targeted by a villain who is more cruel and vengeful than anyone else, your life in the future will be very difficult. Fred and Cedric, who were standing by, also expressed the same feeling, so Fred did not act as usual. He sang the same tune as George, and while George was being taught a lesson, he took out a list and handed it over. "This is the result of the hard work of my two brothers yesterday afternoon and this morning, involving about 200 people. This is their signature. Everyone is looking forward to your game, but we don't know when we can play it." In response, Karl said there was no need to worry. He had previously been a little worried about whether Professor Snape could join his side. However, Professor McGonagall's punishment this time was just to give him a pillow, just because he wanted to sleep. I'm very confident now. As long as Professor Snape sees Harry in women's clothes in the afternoon, I will basically have the upper hand. As long as this last technical problem is solved, the rest will be easy to handle, but think about it carefully. It seems that I need to hire an accountant. After all, the business will be very busy in the future, and it is impossible for me to handle all the income and expenditure by myself. At this moment, Hermione, known as Professor Little McGonagall by her classmates, came towards this side in a hurry, pushing a cart. As soon as he got closer, he didn't care about the looks of other students. He went straight to Carol and said bluntly, "I have bought all the books you requested. I asked my parents to rush to buy them last night. Your Ms. Rosier is very efficient. I sent an owl to deliver them at noon today. They are all here now. Do you want to count them?" Hearing this, Karl's mood became very good. He quickly stood up and looked at the small cart of books behind Hermione. He was very happy and gave the girl a big hug and said sincerely, "Thank you very much, Miss Granger. You have been a great help. I will pay for the purchase of the books." "Pay your parents in the form of a check, along with 20% of the total amount as a reward, and have them withdraw it from Ms. Rosier at any time. Hermione was really dazed by Karl's hug, and her clever brain stopped working for a moment. Especially under the strange looks and boos from the crowd. He quickly pushed the other person away. He said loudly with a red face, "No need to thank me, but don't forget what you promised me. You said you would give me the results this week. I hope you won't break your promise, Mr. Liar." Seeing the other party giving him a nickname, Carol shrugged indifferently and flipped through the books with great interest. At the same time, he seemed to have thought of something, threw the book aside, and grabbed Hermione, who wanted to leave. "What do you want to do?" Hermione, who was held back, stuttered a little. Her brain was working too slowly at the moment because of the high temperature. Her eyes became a little blurry. In fact, she could easily break free from Karl's pull, but it seemed that the girl still had some expectations. Seeing steam coming out of Miss Beaver's head, Karl realized that his actions just now seemed inappropriate. He quickly let go of the other person's hand and said somewhat awkwardly, "I'm sorry, my behavior just now was indeed not that of a gentleman. Please don't misunderstand me. I just wanted to invite you join my team as an accountant." "No more?" Hermione was a little surprised and a little angry. Seeing the expression on the girl's face, Carol was also a little confused. He scratched his head and asked, "That's all? What else do you want? You can make your request regarding salary and benefits." Hearing this, everyone fell silent. Cedric and the Weasley brothers both looked very disappointed. Hannah, who was standing by, even felt that Hermione was a little pitiful. Sure enough, after being stunned for half a minute, Hermione took a deep breath and then spoke loudly, "You are just a bastard, a damn liar." After a roar, Hermione walked away directly, and Hannah hurriedly chased after her, wanting to comfort her friend. Only Cab was left sitting there with a confused look on his face, muttering, "What did I lie to her about? If you are not satisfied with the treatment, can we talk about it? Is it necessary to yell like this?" It was really hard to guess what the girl was thinking. Karl shook his head, stopped thinking about it, and waved his hand to put the books into his ring. Then he started to enjoy his lunch seriously. This morning might be the happiest morning for him since he entered the magical world. Not only did he make Harry dress up as a woman, thus alleviating most of the unnecessary attention from himself, but he also successfully trained Professor Snape. Let the other person slowly fall into your hands. Let you control him and get the books you want. With these books, I basically had a plan for the background story of the game, the board design, and the card art. In one night, I was able to make the prototype of the cards myself. As for Hermione, it was just a minor flaw. He would definitely want this accountant. It would just cost a little more. He was in a very good mood and even prepared for the afternoon class. Being a really obedient boy. He decided not to play pranks on poor Professor Quirrell anymore. But just as he made up his mind, the voice of the dog system appeared in his mind again. "You are about to meet your ex. As the saying goes, when you meet your ex, you must beat him or her to death. A special task is issued to destroy Voldemort's heart and make him realize the gap between him and the real villain. The mission rewards 2000 magic points and 5000 points." Chapter 46, Flirting with Cedric. Why is it so difficult to be a good person? Looking at the tasks sent by the dog system, Karl felt terrible. The huge moral burden made him put down the food in his hand even as a Hufflepuff. He was deeply entangled, and Cedric, who was standing beside him, also noticed this. Some said with a gloating look, "Now, you've come to your senses. It's too late to regret it. You should be more careful with ladies and not be so direct. Their hearts are different from ours." Cedric kept talking, and it turned out that this guy thought that Karl might have realized that his previous behavior towards Hermione was an appropriate point. "So I began to tell the other person about my skills regarding women over and over again." Carol was confused by this long speech, and it took him a long time to react. From the very beginning, this guy never really took the task given to him seriously, and his mind was full of dirty thoughts. "No. This is absolutely not possible. This handsome boy is my reserved subordinate. How can your mind be filled with women all the time? You have to focus on your career and stop thinking about those things every day. Point. So he turned to look at Cedric and spoke with a serious expression he had never had before. Shut up, what are you talking about? The first time we were in the common room, I have emphasized to you that the goal of our organization is wealth and honor, not girls. You must straighten your mind and focus on your career instead of thinking about the scandals between me and those little girls every day. Did you hear that clearly? This serious criticism made Cedric a little confused, but he was smart and reacted quickly. Then he looked at Cole with a strange look and asked quietly, you really don't have any feelings for those two girls? Although they may be a little young, you are already 15 years old. You don't have any unspeakable secrets, right? And even if you don't have feelings for others, at least be gentle and considerate. They are girls after all, and need the care of gentlemen. Seeing that this guy not only did not reflect on his mistakes, but instead became worse, he even suspected that there was something wrong with his body. Carl, who suffered a great insult, even wanted to directly launch an avada kedavra at the other party. But after careful consideration, he still endured it. At the same time, he also discovered a very serious problem. Cedric's character is too gentle and considerate. He is nice to everyone. So if this guy really falls in love with a girl, I simply couldn't imagine that situation. The thought of my capable subordinates becoming some girl's bootlicker in the future was simply too much for me. Cole was a little crazy, and after thinking about it, he suddenly hugged Cedric's cheeks with both hands. After fixing the other person's head, he tilted his head up, then stood up straight and looked down at the other person. Don't even think about it. You are the first official member of the organization and you must give everything to the organization. Women will only affect your judgment speed. Clear them from your mind immediately. Do you hear me? Cedric, whose head was grabbed, even felt it was a bit ridiculous, and he wanted to speak loudly to Karl. There are only two of us in our organization. Is this necessary? Are you a little too excited? But for some reason, when those sapphire eyes stared at him, Cedric felt his heartbeat quicken. He was usually very annoying, this kind of rude and unreasonable tough action, but under Carol's watchful eyes, after struggling for a long time, he could only hide and avoid the other person's gaze while muttering softly, "Got it, boss. I'll listen to you." Only after hearing this did he feel relieved and sat back in his seat, ready to have lunch. And suddenly I felt that something was wrong. Why was Cedric blushing and keeping his head down without saying anything? There was also something strange in the eyes of the two Weasley brothers. Just when she was puzzled, the voice of the dog system sounded again. Congratulations to the host. You have successfully flirted with your male classmate for the first time, and you are beginning to realize your own scumbag soul. Add 1000 points to your score, and add 1 to your male charm. Your current score is 8750, and your male charm is 88 points. You can successfully make a man fall in love with you. WTF. Karl roared in his heart. Why is it that every time he eats by himself, he always has such bad luck? To encounter such things, he quickly finished the food on his plate, then left the cafeteria with a sullen face under the gazes of many people. He was preparing to go directly to the afternoon class. As he walked, he became angrier and angrier, and the anger in his heart broke through the shackles of morality. As for the promise to Professor McGonagall, it also drifted away with the wind. He thought about it in his heart as he walked. Professor Quirrell, please don't blame me. You've already been unlucky enough to be possessed by Voldemort, so it doesn't matter if you're unlucky again. Who asked me to have a meal and make myself feel bad? As he thought about this, Professor Quirrell, who was hiding in his room and eating lunch alone, couldn't help but feel a chill on his back. He was so panicked that he didn't even eat his meal and asked in a panic, "Master, I feel something is wrong. I always feel like something is wrong. Could it be that Dumbledore has discovered us? Otherwise, let's leave Hogwarts first." To be honest, he was really scared. Under Dumbledore's nose, with Voldemort's face on the back of his head. It's scary enough just to think about it. And there were those little wizards, each one more difficult than the other. In that morning class, the two twin brothers almost tore off his turban. Thinking about it now, they still feel scared. What's more, he also heard that there was a very special guy among this year's freshmen who had played tricks on 2 professors in a row. I will be attending his class this afternoon. What should I do if I get teased by him and accidentally get exposed? He thought about it and even considered asking for leave instead of attending the first grade class this afternoon. But Voldemort on the back of his head obviously had different ideas and immediately scolded in his hoarse voice, "Shut up, idiot. Why are you so cowardly? The more you act like that, the weirder it looks. Where is your brain? So, you are still a Ravenclaw graduate? You are just like a fool. You must go to this class, or I will punish you severely." When Professor Quirrell heard the other party say that he was going to punish him, he was so scared that he immediately knelt down and begged for mercy. In the end, he was met with another round of scolding. He had no choice but to go to his defense against the dark arts class with the expectation of certain death. On the other side, Cal quickly arrived at the classroom. As soon as he entered the door, he smelled the unpleasant smell of garlic. Several Hufflepuff students followed along the way and even walked in and out again, repeatedly confirming that they had not walked into the wrong classroom. Only then did he walk in hesitantly. As time went by, both professors and students came to the classroom, especially Professor Quirrell, the protagonist. He was the last one to arrive. As soon as he entered the classroom, his mood immediately improved a lot. Because in the last row of the classroom, there were professors sitting in a row, and the one he feared the most, Dumbledore. Although it's a bit scary, with so many professors around, the kid should be more well behaved. He hurried to the podium, ready to start his class. Before he had time to speak, Voldemort at the back of his head seemed to have noticed the scene. Especially when he found Snape was also present. I couldn't help but sigh in my mind. Severus is truly a loyal fellow. He knows that you are useless, so he even brought a bunch of professors to give you courage. Chapter 47, Torture of the Defense Against the Dark Arts Class. Hearing his master say this, Professor Quirrell couldn't help but feel a little moved, but he only observed carefully for a while. He was a little confused again and muttered quietly in his heart, "Master, but why are Severus' eyes fixed on the little girl who just walked in? I've been watching it for a long time. Could it be that he had this habit before?" This question made Voldemort a little confused. His already small and shared brain started spinning wildly. I could only respond silently, "Don't worry about the details. Everyone can have his own quirks, as long as he is loyal to me. None of this is a problem, including for you. As long as you are loyal to me, I will grant you everything you want." Professor Quirrell couldn't help but believe what Voldemort had said, but he always thought that, based on Snape's age, it's really a bit too perverted to like a girl who is young enough to be his daughter. Due to the host's behavior, Professor Snape's reputation is -1, and the bonus points are 50. Just when Cole was thinking about how to create trouble in this class and make this stupid professor in front of him look ridiculous, the system's voice sounded again in his mind. He was confused by what it said, so he looked back. Professor Snape, who was sitting in the last row of the classroom, had a look of confusion in his eyes as he put on his wig. Her image has improved a lot. Her long straight black hair is no longer casually draped over her shoulders as before, but is tied into a small ponytail at the back of her head. 2 wisps of sideburns hang on both sides of his cheeks, and combined with Professor Snape's angular facial features, he looks tough and handsome. What's going on? Becoming handsome will lower your reputation. Do Hogwarts students have such high expectations of their teachers? Just when Cole was puzzled, Professor Quirrell on the podium patted the table, cleared his throat and said, "Thank you all professors for coming, and my lovely students. Please be quiet, we will start the class soon." As he said that, the guy was about to pick up the textbook in front of him and start his own tape recorder teaching method. But as soon as he finished reading the first word, a student raised his hand to interrupt him. It turned out that Ron had been sitting next to Harry, looking at his good brother, and was attracted by the strange smell in the classroom. He choked and covered his nose repeatedly. Suddenly, Gryffinder's courage burst out, and he spoke directly. "Professor, can you open the window? The smell in the classroom is too bad. You will make many students unbearable. Besides, we are here to attend classes, not to breathe poisonous fumes." After he finished speaking, some little wizards couldn't help laughing. It seemed that they also wanted to see the professor make a fool of himself. But the laughter didn't last long, and they quickly covered their mouths again, not because they were afraid of being discovered and blamed by Professor Quirrell. Ever since Professor Quirrell came in, the smell of garlic in the classroom has become stronger in just a few minutes. The smell in the classroom became even more unbearable, to the point where it was impossible to breathe deeply. No, no, no. Professor Quirrell waved his hands frantically and explained stutteringly, when I was in Africa, I met a zombie. I was cursed and couldn't blow the wind. As he spoke, he pointed to the scarf on his head. Look, this is the gift given to me by the prince of that tribe. Resurrected zombies. That's cool. Is there such a thing? Many young wizards became interested in this, and the name of the resurrected zombies became well known in the magical world. It is a mysterious religious product, somewhat similar to the revenant spirits of Haitian voodoo. Every resurrected zombie is a living dead, a walking corpse without consciousness and soul. They are not very aggressive, but they are very useful, and are generally used by many dark wizards as sacrifices in black magic experiments. Then, can you tell me, Professor, how you subdued the resurrected zombies? After Ron, another classmate, raised his hand and asked. No, this has nothing to do with this class. Professor Quirrell avoided answering and lowered his head to flip through the book. Okay, students, turn to page 3. Today we are going to learn how to avoid cabba. Such a cowardly behavior immediately caused boos from the entire student audience, but the Hufflepuff students were fine at first. No matter what the professor's teaching level is, as long as it is acceptable and does not affect their livelihood, everything is fine. But now, the unpleasant smell of Professor Quirrell has made many Hufflepuff students feel that this has seriously affected their appetite before dinner. How could this be tolerated? Everyone booed loudly. As for Gryffindor, there is no need to say more. Among the 4 major houses, they are the group that likes to stir up trouble the most. How could they miss such a good opportunity? They kept raising their hands to speak. Ask Professor Quirrell to tell about that experience. But Professor Quirrell kept avoiding the topic and just read from the book, stuttering like a reading machine. How should I put it? The effect is even worse than that of Professor Binns. Although the old ghost speaks in a hypnotic way, at least his words are clear, and it has a kind of peaceful magic. It is nice to listen to it as a bedtime story. But this professor stuttered when he spoke, and even when he read from the book he couldn't read coherently. If you want to sleep, there are a bunch of professors sitting in the back row watching you. The smell in the room made it impossible to sleep. The result was that the half-hour class turned into complete torture. The students could no longer bear it and began to become restless and crazy. Seeing that the emotions had accumulated to a certain extent and that they were not the ones who caused the trouble this time. Many students had already expressed their dissatisfaction. As an excellent student, I'm the pride of my classmates and the caring friend of my professors. Carol had to take action at this time. He immediately raised his hand and spoke loudly without waiting for the other party to respond. Professor, this class is so boring. If you do this, and we won't be able to learn any real knowledge at all. If we really encounter cabba, what should we do? Should we sit on the ground with a book and read to death like you did? Carl's words immediately received responses from many students who expressed their opinions. Yes, this is really boring. That's right. Everyone can study. If that's the case, I don't want to attend this class. Really? If you don't tell me what I really want to hear, and don't teach me what I really want to see, what's the point of studying here? The students were talking at once and were about to stage a classroom uprising. Seeing that the situation was getting out of control, Professor McGonagall, who was sitting in the last row, instinctively wanted to maintain order in the classroom. But he was stopped by Professor Snape, who was standing beside him. A rare look of joy appeared on his gloomy face. His eyes were first fixed on Quirrell on the stage. Then he looked at Professor McGonagall and spoke very reasonably. This is his class. We are just here to listen and learn. As the dean and vice president, you should know that you cannot interfere. You have to let the other party control the situation themselves. Otherwise you will fail. After saying that, Professor Snape turned his gaze to Dumbledore standing beside him, his eyes as stern as a sword point as if to say, I've always remembered your betrayal of me and your refusal to hand over the position of defense against the dark arts professor to me. This is your biggest mistake. You have to stand by me today, or you know what I mean. Chapter 48 First Speech. After being threatened by Professor Snape's eyes, Professor McGonagall's eyes also followed Dumbledore, who was caught in the middle, was really in a dilemma for a moment and thought about it for a long time. He could only look at Karl, who was sitting in the front row, standing up and ready to give a speech at any time, with a resentful look. They are so similar, exactly the same. They both like to stir up trouble. After reminiscing about the past, the old man immediately used one of his specialties and pretended to be stupid. After all, it was understandable that he was confused due to his age. So Dumbledore acted as if he felt nothing. The noise of his classmates in the classroom and the questions of the two professors, it was as if they didn't exist at all. He took out the candy bag he brought with him and grabbed a handful of crawling cockroaches from it. Throw a handful into your mouth and start savoring the sweet taste. This act of tacit approval made Professor McGonagall very angry, but she also felt that Professor Snape was right. So I decided not to interfere with the course after the possible help from outside the field disappeared. Professor Quirrell was no match for Karl at all, and the rhythm of the entire class was immediately controlled by Karl. He stood straight, looked at all the students with high spirits, and spoke seriously. We don't disrespect teachers, that must be made clear first, but we must ensure that we are students of Hogwarts. You have the right to receive the best education in the magical world. This is unquestionable and cannot be denied by anyone. The importance of defense against the dark arts, some would argue, is irrelevant now that the British wizarding world has been at peace for so long. The younger generation doesn't need to pay too much attention to these things, but who can guarantee that the mysterious man, the perverted murderer, will not make a comeback? This impassioned speech not only avoided the trouble of disrespecting the professor, but also denied Professor Quirrell's teaching method, and also dissed Voldemort by the way. In just a few words, the students were excited, while the professors in the back row were all shocked. Professor Quirrell on the podium had a pale face. He could already hear Voldemort's angry roar in his mind. He wanted to stop Karl from talking any further, but how could Karl pay any attention to him? After stirring up the emotions of the classmates, he immediately continued, Don't be afraid, my dear classmates. I can see the fear hidden in your eyes. You are all afraid of the mysterious man, but what I want to say is, we should not be afraid of fear. The only thing that can fear us is fear itself. So we should cheer up, study excellent knowledge, and learn the most useful dark arts defense course, so that when the fear does come, you and I can stand there and face it. Go get that noseless murderous pervert. This generous and childish speech immediately attracted overwhelming praise from classmates. Whether they were Hufflepuff or Gryffindor students, they all knocked on the table in unison. The dong 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 sound was like a war drum, responding to the fear that Karl had mentioned. Start declaring war. Karl continued to try, even though he had already seen Professor McGonagall's face, which was already very bad. But he just wanted to say that it's not that the students don't behave like human beings, but the dog system gave them too much. Plus this Professor Quirrell. Isn't it a bit too rubbish, including the pervert behind his head? This made Karl feel deeply frustrated. He has always adhered to a principle that it doesn't matter whether his opponent is a good guy or a villain. You must have enough coolness to defeat your opponent and get the proper sense of accomplishment. Instead of like this, the opponent is simply vulnerable. This feeling is very bad. Just like driving an Aston Martin and racing with a person riding a shared bicycle. But even if you win, you don't get a chance to show your face. So he had to provoke the other party, make him lose his mind, and do something out of the ordinary, so that his actions would not seem like a prank. At the same time, put the blame on the other party. Sure enough, after the rounds of Voldemort behind Professor Quirrell's head had already gone mad with rage. His body has not recovered, and his intelligence has been affected. From a scientific point of view, He should be considered a mentally retarded person and a fool. I'm a fool, but Karl still teases me like this. It would be strange if he didn't go crazy. Voldemort roared madly in Professor Quirrell's mind. Give me this body immediately. I want to punish this arrogant boy. Let him see the glory of the Dark Lord. I will kill this ignorant little brat. Professor Quirrell still wanted to resist. He was really scared. What if Voldemort really killed Karl in the classroom? Then I would be the one to take the blame. I don't want to stay in Azkaban for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, his resistance was of no avail, and he performed a shy street dance on the podium. Professor Quirrell, who was always weak and stuttering, suddenly stood up straight. His eyes full of sharp coldness, he first looked at the classmate who was still banging the table, and scolded him harshly. Stop it, you idiots. If you hit me again, get out of the classroom. With just one sentence, the whole audience was silent. The students stopped what they were doing, but continued to whisper to each other. Some people said, what happened to Professor Quirrell? Why did he suddenly become so angry? Some people said, I don't think we will be punished. I don't want to be penalized. More people are saying, look at his gaze and aura. How come he looks so much like Professor Snape? These discussions reached Professor Snape's ears without reservation, and his expression, which had just softened a little, finally softened. His face instantly turned into a sour one. Professor McGonagall was also confused, but out of respect between professors she did not speak, and even believed that necessary strictness was beneficial to teaching, but the words could be gentler. After scolding the other students, Professor Quirrell looked at Karl again, his eyes full of murderous intent. Mr. Hohenzollern, you like to stand out among the students. Don't you know that this kind of behavior is often very dangerous? Hearing this, Karl looked at the professor with a look of disdain, which changed to one of interest. He didn't sit down, but stood up, and looked at the other person, saying lightly, of course, I was born in the Muggle world, so I certainly understand what you mean better, but I'm in Hogwarts now. How could I be in danger? Because of your protection and that of other professors. Muggle, huh? After hearing Karl say that he was of Muggle born, Professor Quirrell's face was clearly full of disdain. He said quietly, since you are not satisfied with my teaching method, then it is up to you to propose how this class should be taught. Karl fell into the trap. Although he was disdainful in his heart, his expression was sincere. He pretended to think about it seriously. It was not until the other person showed an anxious expression on his face that he spoke slowly. Defense against the dark arts is mainly about practice. If possible, I would like to have a magic battle with the professor. No, absolutely not. Professor McGonagall, who had been silent all this time, immediately stopped them loudly. Professor Quirrell's eyes lit up, and he spoke with a sinister look. Of course, my dear student, if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49. The villain dies in Zangduo. After Karl challenged for a duel, the classroom fell into chaos again, and this time the protagonists were no longer students from the two colleges. It was Professor McGonagall and Professor Quirrell. Professor McGonagall looked at Professor Quirrell menacingly, and shouted in a serious tone across the air, absolutely not. How can you agree to such a request? Mr. Hohenzollern is only a first-year student. How can you duel with the professor? I absolutely disagree with this, Professor. Quirrell felt a little embarrassed when he heard this, but the anger in his heart made him unable to swallow it. With such a good opportunity in front of him to teach this ignorant little bastard a lesson, he certainly wasn't willing to give it up. But in this situation, it is difficult for me to say anything. If I say too much and get exposed, it will be more trouble than gain. Just when he was at a loss, the most loyal minister in his heart, Professor Snape, stood up. He glanced at Professor Quirrell on the podium with a dark look, with suspicion hidden in the depths of his eyes, but he spoke righteously to Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall, this is Professor Quirrell's class. I trust him as our dear headmaster. personally selected defense against the dark arts professor must have his own unique approach and appropriate practical skills. It will help to restore the dignity he lost in this class and will be more beneficial to future teaching. I think you should not stop it. 2. Loyal, so loyal that it is beyond words. Professor Quirrell looked at Professor Snape with eyes full of unspeakable approval. Even when the other person was speaking, his eyes suddenly shifted from himself to the old man Dumbledore. He did not have the slightest doubt, and even showed some rare consideration for the other party, thinking that the other party did this to avoid being exposed. So after Professor Snape and Professor McGonagall spoke, the decision-making power fell into Dumbledore's hands again. Dumbledore could only feel helpless about this. He had begun to believe the evaluation Snape had made to Karl when they were facing each other in private. This guy's poisonous. Nothing good will happen if you stay with him. There was nothing he could do. The old man was really afraid of taking the blame. He had already offended Severus and Minerva because of this bastard. If he continues like this, I won't be able to live to see the day when this bastard graduates from Hogwarts. So he kicked the ball to Professor Flitwick beside him and said to him with a smile, "What do you think? You're an expert in magical dueling, and I'd like to get your opinion." The simple-minded Professor Flitwick, of course, didn't know that Dumbledore was setting a trap for him, and he thought the headmaster was really asking for his opinion seriously. So, after thinking about it, I immediately and firmly gave my answer. If it's just a normal prank magic, you can still give it a try. After all, the students have been very dissatisfied throughout the whole class. Using some simple magic duels can inspire students' enthusiasm for the defense against the dark arts class. Overall, it's a good thing. After Professor Flitwick's speech, Dumbledore immediately took advantage of the situation, stood up for the first time, and looked at Cole with resentment. "Okay, Mr. Hohenzollern, I agree to your request, but you and Professor Quirrell can only use non-lethal prank magic. Make sure you stay safe." After saying this, Leodeng looked at the other students with a smile, opened his arms and said happily, "Alright, kids, step back and let our two duelists take the stage." With the principal's permission, the long silent classroom immediately erupted into warm applause, and the students retreated excitedly. He also volunteered to move the table away, leaving a large area in front of the podium empty. Then he hid at the back, wanting to take a look at Mr. Karl, who had become famous after only one day at school. What kind of sparks can there be between me and this most boring professor? After the stage was vacated, Professor Quirrell took the lead and stood on the left side of the open space. The graceful and swift movements were completely different from the timid feeling he had before. Cole was not in a hurry. He walked leisurely to the right side of the open space, took out his black dragon spine wand, and said with a smile, "Please, enlighten me, Professor." Quirrell was dismissive of this. He bowed gracefully, then raised his wand to his forehead and said disdainfully, "Magic duels have etiquette. You are a muggle born. Although you are humble, you must be able to understand reason. I'm only showing you this once, and I hope you can learn from it." Karl was very upset by such pretentious words. He just wanted to give the other party a hard time. But now, he has decided to make sure this guy's kicked out of Hogwarts. So he said to the dog system in his mind, "Is there a spell that has no lethality, but is perverted and disgusting enough? Listen carefully to my request. It must be perverted and disgusting enough." Hehe, host, you finally got it. It's natural. The magic spell reincarnation of the 5 grains attacks the human sphincter. It can make people unable to control their excretion, and the spell giving birth to children can make anyone experience the pain of a woman's special period. Since the opponent is a man, it is especially recommended to use the following spell. Be sure to. Karl cut off the conversation with the system. He just had no morals, but he was not a pervert. The latter one was too perverted. I still have a kind heart. How could I do such a thing to my professor? So he chose the first spell. Since he was fighting against the so-called X, the dog system was very considerate and did not charge him any fees. It just kept nagging in his mind, asking him to use the second spell. Karl naturally chose to ignore it and looked at Professor Quirrell. He also imitated him, bowed gracefully, and then raised his wand to the center of his eyebrows. But unlike him, because of that stupid turban, Professor Quirrell looked more like a funny clown when he saluted. When Karl saluted, he was more like a Victorian gentleman. The strong contrast triggered discussions among the students, and all kinds of whispers were heard by each other. This caused the half-blood wizard, who had always insisted on the glory of pure blood, to lose all his defenses, and his right hand holding the wand was shaking from exerting too much force. Karl caught this keenly, so he asked in a pretended hurry, "Professor, then who of us should strike first? And my magic might be a little painful, so you might want to be patient for a while. Of course I believe that with your skills, you can easily defend it. Killing people and destroying their hearts was Karl's usual technique, in order to drive Professor Quirrell completely crazy. He suppressed his anger and spoke in a cold tone. "Don't worry, you attack first, and I will not defend myself. I will show you the difference between you and the professor. Boy, don't cry after the final duel. I will definitely." The villain died because he talked too much. Karl never tolerated these people, no matter if they were gang leaders he had eliminated before, or some other people. Often, as soon as the other person says the first word, I will pull the trigger and send them to see God. I have let the professor speak so much this time, and I have done my best. So before the other party could finish his harsh words, he simply waved his wand and shouted loudly, "The Cycle of Grains." Chapter 50. Professor Quirrell and -039's complete social death. A red light slowly flew out from the tip of Karl's wand. Looking at the weak light and the spell that he had never heard of. Professor Quirrell was extremely disdainful, and just as he had promised, he did not make any defensive gestures. He didn't even move the hand holding the wand. He just stood there straight, even trying to look as handsome as possible. It was just because of the outfit that he looked particularly funny. It took the red magic light 3 full seconds to fly across the distance of less than 10 meters. The bullet hit the opponent's stomach, and as expected, Professor Quirrell did not feel any pain. He even felt a little warm in his stomach. He shook his head in disdain and habitually wanted to say something harsh to Karl. But this time, he didn't have any chance to speak. He just raised his wand. Suddenly, I felt a movement in my abdomen and the sound of bubbles bursting continuously, coming from Professor Quirrell's abdomen. The professors and students were all puzzled after hearing this. After a moment, the magic took effect, and even though Professor Quirrell tried hard to tighten his sphincter, he was still unable to control his sphincter. Realizing that he had been tricked, Voldemort immediately returned control of his body to the poor fellow. After all, if you had diarrhea in class, what does it have to do with me? Voldemort. After regaining control of his body, Professor Quirrell immediately thought of escaping, but the students and teachers had already retreated to the back. He had already blocked the door and stood in front of everyone with a distorted face, wanting to shout loudly. Yet he didn't dare to breathe in, for fear that, if he exhaled deeply, he would be plunged 3,000 miles into a waterfall. Finally, Old Deng noticed something unusual, pushed everyone aside, walked up to the other person, patted him gently on the shoulder, and asked with concern, "What's wrong with you? Are you feeling unwell?" This time, the well-intentioned concern became the last straw that broke the camel's back. That pat on the shoulder, it also disrupted the balance of muscle strength that Professor Quirrell had worked hard to maintain. "It's over, Professor." Quirrell had lost all hope in life. After a loud roar, a strange liquid mixed with some solid substances appeared. It started to pour out of his body, because this guy had been eating garlic, and had been constipated for a long time. Those things continued to ferment in his stomach and intestines, and when they suddenly opened up, you can imagine the smell. The whole classroom was filled with an indescribable stench, as if it had been attacked by a dung bomb. Dumbledore, who was standing closest, suffered the most. His body was stiff as he watched himself slap the other person's right hand. He looked at the dark brown indescribable thing under the other person's body again. Suddenly realizing that he might not be clean, he suppressed the intense nausea and pulled his right hand back forcefully. This violent movement caused Professor Quirrell to lose his balance, and he had no desire to live. It was no longer possible for him to maintain his balance through his own efforts. Just like that, in the eyes of everyone, Professor Quirrell fell backwards in a daze into a pool of indescribable substance. Dark brown solid mixed with yellow-brown liquid. There were ripples and splashes of liquid, even landing on Dumbledore's robes. Many students couldn't help but vomit wildly after witnessing this scene. After a while, it was completely impossible for anyone to stay in the classroom, whether it was the professor or the students. They all rushed outside, and Cole was even faster. After casting the spell, he was alone. And while no one was paying attention, he quickly hid under the table on the podium and just stuck his head out. I saw that the podium was covered with smelly objects. Fortunately, I was smart, otherwise I would have been covered with shit. So he dodged, crawled out from under the table on the podium, and then kicked out with a big kick. He kicked open the door in front of the classroom and shouted, "Go this way, there's no one here." Seeing that there was still an escape passage, the students immediately split into two groups and passed through quickly. Of course, before leaving, I couldn't help but cover my nose and suppress my nausea. I looked around and felt like I had lost all desire to live. Professor Quirrell was lying on the ground motionless with tears in his eyes. The students were still retching until they reached the corridor, surrounded by professors and Dumbledore. All the professors looked at Dumbledore with disbelief and thought to themselves, how did you pick such a weirdo to be the defense against the dark arts professor? Professor Snape's eyes were full of pride, which made Dumbledore extremely embarrassed. At this time, Carol, the caring little cotton-padded jacket, hurried over, but he avoided the main point and ignored him completely. This matter was caused by him alone, he said with worry and anger. "Headmaster, I must begin to doubt the quality of teaching at Hogwarts. This is something I have never seen before, but, adhering to the original intention of seeking the welfare of all students, I still want to say that the next defense against the dark arts professor should be decided immediately. As for Professor Quirrell," Karl said this as if he cared about the other person, and deliberately stuck his head through the gap in the door. He looked at Professor Quirrell, who was lying alone in the classroom, and said helplessly, "He may need some psychological treatment for a period of time." Hearing this, Dumbledore was almost furious. He had never been so angry since 1945. Those eyes, through the half-moon lenses, stared at Carol with unusual resentment and asked in a sarcastic tone, "Then, Mr. Hohenzollern, as a top student, what do you think? Who do you want to recommend?" These words immediately attracted a burst of cold gazes, and Professor Snape stared at Karl. Carol looked at the other person with a smile and slowly extended a ring finger. His meaning was very clear. "If you want me to speak well of you, you must promise me what I said before." Professor Snape certainly understood what this meant. He first sighed, then quietly turned his head to look at Harry, who was still retching at the door after accidentally making eye contact with him. She took a deep breath and nodded lightly. After Karl finally got what he wanted, he immediately said it bluntly, "We need a professor with integrity, courage, teaching experience, and kindness to teach important lessons. So, I recommend Professor Nepper. I think no one should doubt his achievements in defense against the dark arts." I've finished speaking. Who's in favor? Who's against? This may sound a bit arrogant, but now the professors just want to leave this disgusting place as soon as possible. Dumbledore didn't want to dwell on it any longer. He could already tell for sure that this little guy was really poisonous. You cannot communicate too much with the other party, otherwise you will be led into the other party's language trap. As for what happened today, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future to settle accounts with the other party. So he looked down at his already dirty robe, suppressed his nausea, and shook his hands. "Well, that's all. Severus, I'll just trouble you for a while." As he said that, he asked Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick to take the student who was still retching away and go to the infirmary quickly. The health and safety of students always comes first, and this is what Professor Quirrell said the moment those things were discharged from her body. It has been completely forgotten. But Professor Snape's happiness didn't last long. The old man still held a grudge. After all, looking at the whole matter, the old man had a feeling that Karl and Professor Snape had teamed up to set a trap for him. So he came back halfway, unwilling to give in, looked at Professor Snape, and said with confidence, "Oh, by the way, please send Professor Quirrell to the infirmary and clean up this classroom after all. You still have to use this classroom after." Saying that, he quickly walked away. Snape, who was assigned to this task, had his cheeks twitching wildly. Then, he looked at Carol with an extremely unfriendly look. Carol ignored the other party, snorted coldly, and said disdainfully as he left the corridor, "Why are you looking at me? The old man didn't ask me to clean up. This is not your class. You have no right to punish me. Take the time to consult your predecessor. He will be very helpful to you, dear professor." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.